The first sign is not a tower, not a wall, not a monument rising proudly into the sun. It is an absence, a break in the stone, a dark mouth half hidden beneath fallen blocks, where the wind moves differently and the ground seems to breathe cold air from another age. Above it, the ancient world lies in ruins, broken columns scattered like bones, temple steps worn smooth by vanished feet, carved animals staring from cracked reliefs with eyes that have outlived every empire that once claimed them. The surface has already told its familiar story of kings, gods, wars, offerings, and collapse. But below that story, under the dust in the ceremonial courtyards, something else waits in silence. No one who first approaches such a place sees a city at once. The idea is too large. The eye sees only fragments, a descending stairway cut sharply into bedrock, a tunnel sealed with stones that do not match the surrounding masonry, a chamber whose walls are blackened by smoke from lamps long extinct. Then come the smaller details, the things that make the silence more unsettling. A drainage groove carved with unnecessary care, a socket where a door once turned, a niche too deliberate to be natural, a passage that does not lead to a tomb, or at least not only to a tomb, but bends deeper, vanishing under the foundations of temples built by people who may never have known what was beneath them. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world is not a single easy thing. It is part place, part pattern, part warning, across the lands of the old Mediterranean, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, Egypt, the Levant, Persia, South Asia, and beyond. Ancient builders repeatedly turned downward when they wanted to protect, conceal, sanctify, or survive. They carved into hillsides, dug beneath palaces, hollowed out sacred precincts, expanded natural caves into ritual worlds, and buried passages under cities that later generations walked across without understanding. Some of these spaces are known, some have been excavated and measured, some remain blocked, flooded, unstable, or only partly understood. Others survive only as rumours attached to ruins, stories of sealed chambers, priestly tunnels, hidden archives, and gates that should not be opened. The phrase Forbidden City sounds like legend, but the impulse behind it is deeply human and historically real. Ancient people often divided space into the permitted and the forbidden, the public and the restricted, the clean and the dangerous, the world of ordinary life and the world reserved for gods, ancestors, rulers, or the dead. A temple might welcome crowds into its outer courts while hiding its inner chamber from all but a few priests. A palace might glitter above ground while storage rooms, escape passages, wells, and archives lay below. An acropolis might look like a landscape of tomb entrances, but beneath it stretch shafts, corridors, and burial chambers arranged with logic only partially visible to anyone standing under the sky. The mystery begins because underground spaces do not behave like ruins above ground. A fallen palace becomes a hill of brick. A burned city leaves ash layers, pottery, walls, and streets. But a chamber under the earth can remain intact for centuries, then vanish in a single collapse. A tunnel can be sealed and forgotten so completely that later builders cut foundations directly over it. A stairway can be buried not by catastrophe, but by decision. The evidence remains incomplete because ancient secrecy often achieved exactly what it was meant to achieve. It limited witnesses, it reduced records, it turned architecture into silence. Imagine a city at its height. The sun is harsh on the limestone courtyards, traders pass through gates with baskets, jars, and animals, scribes mark inventories on tablets or papyrus, workers repair walls, smoke rises from kilns, priests move through shaded corridors with measured calm. Above ground, everything appears ordered and visible, but below, another system exists. Cisterns gather rainwater from rooftops, channels carry runoff away from sacred buildings, storerooms hold grain, oil, metal, and offerings. Tombs preserve the dead in controlled darkness. Narrow passages connect restricted zones. In certain places, the descent is not practical at all but symbolic, a movement from life toward death, from daylight toward origins, from the human city toward the underworld imagined beneath it. No single explanation fully accounts for this downward turn. Survival explains some of it. Water storage, cool chambers, protected granaries, and hidden routes are practical answers to heat, siege, drought, and invasion. Religion explains another part. Caves and underground chambers have long been treated as thresholds, places where the earth seems to open into something older than human memory. Politics explains still more. Power often depends on controlling access. And nothing controls access like a locked descent known only to a chosen few. Yet even when these explanations overlap, they leave behind a residue of uncertainty. Why were some places sealed with such care? Why were certain passages filled deliberately rather than reused? Why do some underground complexes appear larger than their visible purpose requires? The ancient world is full of surfaces designed to impress. Temples rise to lift the eyes, palaces spread wide to display wealth, city walls declare control of territory. But the underground world works differently. It does not announce itself. It is not built for distant viewers. Its power lies in restricted movement, in the knowledge that only certain people may pass, and only under certain conditions. For a ruler, such a place could hold treasure, records, prisoners, emergency stores, or the bodies of ancestors. For a priesthood, it could become a route of initiation, a symbolic underworld, a place where hidden rituals gave visible authority to those who returned from darkness. For ordinary people, it may have been known only through rumour, fragments of ceremony, or the simple fact that some doors were never opened in public. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the story beneath the ancient world is not a quick mystery with a single locked room at the centre. It is a long descent through geology, engineering, religion, fear, and memory. It asks why civilizations that filled the land with monuments also invested so much effort in places meant not to be seen. In some ruins, the forbidden quality comes from burial. In others, it comes from danger. Archaeologists who study underground structures face stone weakened by pressure, oxygen-poor chambers, ancient flood deposits, unstable ceilings, and layers of later construction. A passage may be visible but impossible to enter safely. A chamber may show on a scan but remain unreachable without destroying what stands above it. The narrow light of modern investigation often reveals just enough to deepen the problem. A void beneath a platform, a corridor behind a wall, a sealed shaft beneath a sanctuary. Each discovery enlarges the known map while reminding everyone how much of the map is still missing. What survives in the records suggests that ancient people didn't always experience the underground as merely hidden space. They often treated it as charged space. The earth held the dead, the seeds, the waters, the metals, the ancestors, and the imagined roots of gods who descended and returned. To enter the ground was to cross a boundary. That boundary could be useful, sacred, terrifying, or politically convenient. It could protect food, preserve bodies, stage rituals, shelter people, or conceal knowledge. It could also become a place of abandonment, where a city placed what it no longer wanted to face. This is why the forbidden city beneath the ancient world remains so compelling. It is not simply about whether one vast hidden metropolis lies under one famous ruin, waiting with streets and houses intact. That version belongs more to modern imagination than to careful archaeology. The deeper truth is stranger because it is broader and more believable. Under ancient cities, there were networks of chambers, passages, drains, tombs, shrines, and sealed rooms. Some were functional. Some were sacred. Some were forgotten almost as soon as power changed hands. Together they form a buried counter-city, a shadow architecture beneath the visible world. To follow it, the story has to begin before the great empires, before the most famous capitals, before the names carved into royal inscriptions. It begins with the first human suspicion that the ground below was not empty. It begins when caves became shelters, graves became memory, and darkness became a place where people imagined contact with forces older than the city itself. Long before the first palaces raised above a river plain, long before kings learned to cover their victories in stone, the underground already belongs to human imagination. It begins not as architecture, but as shelter, a cave mouth in a limestone cliff, a hollow in volcanic rock, a dry chamber beyond the reach of rain, wind, and predators. To the earliest communities, such spaces are not mysterious because they are hidden from maps. There are no maps yet. They are mysterious because they feel older than human use. A cave does not seem built, it seems discovered, entered, borrowed from the earth itself. In these earliest dark places, human beings learn that the world has layers. There is the open landscape of hunting, gathering, weather, and danger. There is the firelit interior where bodies gather close and voices drop. There is the deeper chamber where daylight weakens, where smoke curls slowly along stone ceilings, where sound changes shape. Footsteps become louder. Breath seems too present. Even a small flame can make the walls move with shadows. The first underground worlds are not cities, but they create the emotional grammar that later cities inherit: descent, threshold, darkness, secrecy, protection, and return. Some prehistoric caves show long histories of use, not as permanent towns, but as places where people came back again and again for reasons that were sometimes practical and sometimes symbolic. In Europe, painted caves preserve animals moving across walls in astonishing detail. Though scholars still debate the exact meanings of these images, they may reflect hunting knowledge, ritual practice, storytelling, social memory, spiritual belief, or several things at once. What matters here is not any single interpretation, but the setting. People carried light into difficult spaces and placed images where ordinary daylight could not reach. They chose the inside of the earth as a place worthy of memory. Elsewhere, caves and rock shelters held burials. The dead were placed not randomly, but with care, sometimes with tools, pigment, ornaments, animal bones, or stones arranged in deliberate ways. The evidence remains incomplete, and every burial must be interpreted cautiously, but the pattern is powerful. To bury a body is not only to dispose of it, it is to place the dead into a relationship with the ground. It is to say, through action rather than words, that beneath the feet of the living there is another domain, one that receives, preserves, conceals, and transforms. This idea does not disappear when humans begin to build villages. If anything, it grows more complex. As communities settle, cultivate crops, store grain, and return to the same houses year after year, the ground beneath them becomes charged with continuity. Floors are repaired, hearths are remade, old buildings collapse and new buildings rise over them. In many early settlements, generations live literally on top of earlier generations. A village becomes a mound not because anyone planned a monument, but because time itself accumulates. Mud brick decays, roofs fall, walls are levelled, new walls are built, The living city rises on its own dead versions. This is one of the most important facts about the ancient world. Many buried places are not buried because they were hidden deliberately at first. They are buried because settlement is repetitive. A house becomes a foundation, a street becomes a layer, a shrine becomes a memory under another shrine. Archaeologists call these mounds tells in parts of the Near East, and they can contain thousands of years of occupation stacked like compressed history. From the outside, such a mound may look like a natural hill. Inside, it may hold rooms, ovens, courtyards, collapsed roofs, infant burials beneath floors, storage bins, pottery, ash, and traces of lives that did not know they were becoming archaeology. At sites across Anatolia and the Near East, early communities show how easily domestic life, ritual life, and burial could overlap. People sometimes buried their dead beneath house floors, keeping ancestors not in distant cemeteries, but within the inhabited world. This practice should not be romanticized into a single universal belief, because customs varied widely and changed over time. Yet the gesture is striking. The house is not simply a shelter above ground. It becomes a layered place. With the living walking over the remembered dead, the forbidden city beneath the ancient world begins here, in miniature, under floors swept by ordinary hands. As farming spreads and villages become denser, storage becomes a matter of survival. Grain pits, cellars, lined holes, silos, and sealed jars appear as practical technologies of the underground. A harvest must be hidden from damp, heat, insects, animals, theft, and hunger itself. To store food below ground is to trust the earth as a container. It is also to create controlled access. Not everyone may open a store. Not every pit is visible. A community's future can sit beneath a packed floor or under a courtyard, invisible until the moment of need. This practical secrecy will later become political secrecy when temples and palaces control surplus on a much larger scale. The earliest large ritual centres deepen the pattern. Before full urban civilization in some regions, monumental sites already show that people could gather, carve, lift, bury, and remember on an impressive scale. At places like Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Anatolia, massive carved stone pillars were erected by communities who were not yet city dwellers in the later sense. The site was eventually buried, though scholars still debate exactly why and how that process unfolded. It may have involved intentional backfilling, changing ritual needs, abandonment, practical closure, or a combination of factors, but the result is haunting a place of gathering and symbolic power disappears beneath earth, preserved because it was covered. That detail matters because burial can be destruction, but it can also be preservation. To cover something is to hide it from view, yet sometimes it saves it from weather, reuse, and violence. Many ancient monuments survive not because people kept honouring them, but because they vanished from sight. The forbidden is not always forbidden by law or threat. Sometimes it is forbidden by forgetfulness, by tons of soil, by a landscape that smooths itself over the evidence. Before empires have names, people are already learning to build with absence. They dig pits, cut shafts, use caves, bury ancestors, store grain, seal ritual spaces, and live on the ruins of earlier homes. They learn that the ground can hold memory better than speech. They learn that darkness can protect what daylight exposes. They learn that certain places gain power precisely because they are not open to everyone. From this deep background, the later underground city becomes less impossible. It is not a sudden invention by mysterious engineers who appear from nowhere. It grows from habits as old as settled life, and older still the habit of returning to charged places, the habit of hiding what must survive, the habit of placing the dead below the living, and the habit of treating descent as more than movement. By the time the first true cities rise on river plains and trade routes, the underworld has already been prepared in the human mind. The stone stairway, the sealed passage, the chamber beneath the temple, and the forbidden door all inherit a much older story. And once cities begin to rise, that older story changes. Darkness is no longer only natural, it becomes planned. Access is no longer only difficult, it becomes controlled. The ground beneath the city is no longer just a place of memory, burial, and storage. It becomes part of power itself. As the first great cities take shape, the ancient world begins to draw sharper lines between what can be seen and what must remain hidden. Mud-brick walls rise above floodplains. Temples climb in stepped platforms toward the sky. Palaces spread across high ground, their courtyards arranged to guide bodies, eyes, and loyalties in carefully measured ways. Streets fill with traders, animals, carts, priests, officials, labourers, children, soldiers, and strangers from distant towns. The city becomes a machine of visibility. It shows power in walls, gates, towers, statues, processions, and smoke rising from sacred fires. Yet the more visible authority becomes, the more it needs invisible foundations beneath it. The world above takes shape through order, fields are measured, irrigation channels are cleared, taxes are counted, offerings are recorded, clay tablets, seals, weights, tokens, and inscriptions begin to turn memory into administration. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus region, Anatolia, the Levant, and other early centres of urban life, power depends not only on strength but on storage, timing, and controlled movement. Grain must be collected and redistributed. Water must be guided before it becomes flood or drought. Animals must be counted. Labour must be organised. The gods must be honoured in ways that make the social order appear as old and necessary as the sunrise. beneath the ceremonial surface, the city depends on practical systems that ordinary eyes rarely follow from beginning to end. A temple is never just a beautiful building. It's a centre of ritual, economy, and authority. Its outer spaces may be crowded during festivals, but its inner spaces are often restricted. The most sacred rooms are not designed for democratic inspection. In many ancient societies, only certain priests, attendants, or rulers can approach the deepest cult space. The architecture teaches hierarchy without needing to explain it. A visitor moves from open light into narrowing courts, from public ground into controlled thresholds, from noise into quiet, from the many toward the few. The idea of the forbidden does not require a hidden tunnel at first. It can be created by doors, curtains, walls, rules, and the knowledge that crossing the wrong boundary has consequences. But temples and palaces also have literal depths. Beneath floors and behind thick walls lie storage chambers, foundation deposits, drains, wells, crypts, sealed offerings, and sometimes older structures absorbed into new construction. Foundation rituals are especially revealing. Across different ancient cultures, builders sometimes placed objects under walls, floors, or corner small vessels, figurines, tools, animal remains, inscribed materials, or symbolic offerings meant to bind a building to divine protection or royal legitimacy. These are not meant for public display. They are messages placed where no crowd will admire them. Their audience is the god, the ancestor, the earth, the future, or the building itself. This habit makes the surface city feel less solid than it appears. Every major structure stands partly on secrets. The temple platform is not only stone and brick, it may contain earlier platforms, buried offerings, repaired damage, blocked stairs, forgotten chambers, and memory compressed under weight. The palace is not only the ruler's residence, it is a system of approach and exclusion. The gate admits and filters, the court displays and intimidates, the archive records and conceals. The storeroom preserves wealth in a form that can be counted but not freely touched. Power is not just what the ruler shows. Power is also what the ruler can keep from view. The rise of kingship intensifies this divide. A king must be seen to rule, yet the machinery of rule cannot be fully exposed. Royal authority in the ancient world often depends on an aura of special access to gods, ancestors, omens, sacred landscapes, secret rituals, divine names, hidden treasures, and privileged knowledge. Whether the ruler is presented as a god servant, a chosen conqueror, or the guardian of cosmic order, the claim becomes stronger when ordinary people cannot inspect every part of it. The forbidden space becomes a stage for legitimacy precisely because it is not open to everyone. This does not mean ancient people were gullible or passive. Cities are full of practical minds. Farmers know whether canals work, craftsmen know whether stone fits, merchants know the difference between a sealed jar and an empty promise, labourers know the weight of bricks better than any inscription does. But public life still requires symbols, and symbols gain force when they are protected from overfamiliarity. A sacred chamber that everyone enters casually loses part of its power. A tomb opened every day becomes a storeroom, a hidden spring, a sealed archive, a chamber beneath a shrine, or a passage known only to temple officials can gather authority by remaining partially unknown. The surprising detail is that many ancient cities are not clean replacements of old worlds, but living palimpsests. A new dynasty may build over the shrine of a previous one. A conqueror may restore a temple in his own name while preserving deeper foundations he does not fully understand. A priesthood may continue rituals whose original meanings have shifted. A city may contain beneath its streets the bones of villages, graves, flood deposits, burned layers, abandoned wells, and earlier sacred places. The world above presents itself as stable, but below it lies evidence of revision. Every great city is also an archive of its own corrections. This layered quality creates the conditions for the forbidden city beneath the ancient world, not necessarily a perfect underground duplicate of the surface, with avenues and markets hidden in darkness, but a second order of spaces that grows under, within, and behind the official city. Some parts are practical drains, cisterns, granaries, cellars, quarries, storage magazines, and service corridors. Some parts are sacred crypts, foundation deposits, ritual shafts, burial chambers, caves incorporated into sanctuaries, and rooms associated with ancestors or underworld deities. Some parts are political archives, treasuries, restricted passages, prison spaces, and escape routes. Over centuries, these do not always remain separate. A drain may be reused as a hiding place, a quarry may become a chapel, a tomb may be cut into an older tunnel, a sealed chamber may be forgotten, then rediscovered, then sealed again. Scholars still debate the meanings of many restricted ancient spaces because access alone does not explain purpose. A hidden room may be hidden because it is sacred, dangerous, valuable, shameful, unfinished, structurally necessary, or simply obsolete. A blocked passage may signal ritual closure, emergency defense, collapse, later repair, or looting. An underground chamber beneath a temple might preserve offerings, house a cult image, mark an older sacred spot, or serve a function lost with the people who used it. The evidence often survives without the instructions. Archaeology gives the wall, the threshold, the deposit, the tool mark, the ash stain, the pottery shard. It rarely gives the full sentence spoken by the person who closed the door. As cities grow wealthier, their underground needs grow with them. Water management becomes one of the most important forces shaping hidden architecture. A city cannot survive on grandeur. It needs wells, drains, channels, reservoirs, and sometimes tunnels that carry water beneath streets and walls. In dry regions, cisterns can become as vital as temples. In flood-prone regions, drainage can determine whether a city remains habitable. The invisible movement of water beneath the city is a kind of power older than kingship and less forgiving. The ruler who commands armies but cannot manage water rules a monument to future ruin. The city above, then, is never truly separate from the city below. The bright walls depend on dark foundations. The temple courts depend on buried drains and hidden offerings. The royal archive depends on rooms closed to most of the population. The ancestral cult depends on chambers where the dead remain physically near but socially distant. The visible city is the face. The underground is memory, stomach, skeleton, and secret at once. By the time the ancient world reaches its first great phases of urban confidence, descent has become institutional. It has rules. It has architecture. It has guardians. It has meanings that change depending on who enters and who is kept outside. What began in caves and house floors now extends beneath capitals and sacred precincts. The forbidden is no longer only a feeling at the edge of firelight. It is built into the city plan. And once that happens, the dark beneath the ancient world becomes more than a background. It becomes a destination. People descend not only to store grain or bury the dead, but to encounter the sacred, to test initiation, to protect knowledge, to stage power, and to touch the imagined underworld without leaving the city at all. The descent into the sacred dark begins with a change in temperature. Above ground, the city is full of heat, dust, voices, and movement. Below, the air cools. The body notices before the mind has time to arrange the meaning. A stairway cut into rock narrows behind the shoulders. The ceiling lowers. The sounds of the surface weaken until they become less like life and more like memory. Every step changes the relationship between the living person and the world they have left behind. This is why caves, crypts, wells, tunnels, and tombs hold such force in ancient cultures. They do not merely hide things. They transform the act of entering into a passage from one order of existence to another. Across the ancient world, the underground is often treated as a threshold. In Egypt, tombs are not simply containers for bodies, but carefully arranged spaces where death, preservation, kingship, and cosmic renewal meet. In Mesopotamian imagination, the underworld is a shadowed realm beneath the living world, not a place of easy return. In Greek and Roman landscapes, caves and chasms can become entrances associated with prophecy, gods, nymphs, the dead. Or the strange authority of the earth itself. In Anatolia, the Levant, Persia, and many other regions, natural caves, springs, and rock-cut chambers become part of ritual geography. The details vary, sometimes drastically, but the repeated pattern is clear. The ground below is not empty, it is meaningful. A cave used for ritual does not need to be large to feel like another world. A shallow chamber with soot on the ceiling, a spring emerging from darkness, or a narrow passage requiring the visitor to bend can create the feeling of crossing a boundary. Ancient ritual often depends on bodily experience as much as belief. The dimming light, the echo, the smell of damp stone, the pressure of rock overhead, the flicker of lamps, the difficulty of movement. And the awareness of restricted access all shape meaning. A person entering such a space is not simply told that it is sacred. The place makes the body understand it. This helps explain why underground shrines could exist beside great visible temples without competing with them. The temple above announces order. It raises walls, columns, platforms, and altars into the sunlight. The chamber below suggests origin, depth, danger, and hidden presence. The two are not opposites. They complete each other. A god can be honoured in the open with processions and offerings, while the deeper mystery of that god remains enclosed, approached only by those with the proper role, timing, and preparation. What survives in the record suggests that many ancient sacred landscapes worked through such layered access, though the evidence remains incomplete and rarely preserves the full emotional experience of those who entered. Wells occupy a special place in this pattern because they are both practical and uncanny. A well is a machine for survival, but it is also a vertical opening into darkness. It brings hidden water upward from below, making the invisible suddenly essential. In dry regions, control of wells can mean control of settlement itself. Around sacred wells and springs, stories often gather. The water may be healing, dangerous, prophetic, ancestral, or linked to a deity. Even when archaeology can identify the engineering clearly, the symbolic force may be harder to recover. A stone-lined shaft may be only a water source in one period and a ritual focus in another. Later communities may reinterpret it again, layering meanings over the same dark opening. Tombs intensify the forbidden quality of underground space because they contain the most charged boundary of all the boundary between the living and the dead. Ancient tombs are not uniform. Some are simple pits. Some are family chambers reopened over generations. Some are royal monuments designed with enormous labour. Some are cut deep into cliffs or hidden under mounds. But many share one central feature: they create a controlled interior, where the dead remain present yet separated. The tomb is a place of care and danger at once. It preserves the body or bones, gathers offerings, protects status, and marks memory. Yet it is not a house for casual visiting. Its entrance, once closed, becomes a moral and social line. The lesser-known detail is that not all sealed tombs were meant to stay sealed forever in the same way. Some burial chambers were reopened for additional family members, some were visited for offerings, some were deliberately inaccessible after closure, others were robbed in antiquity, reused by later people or altered when beliefs changed. A sealed doorway does not speak with one meaning. It can represent respect, fear, property, ritual completion, dynastic pride, or practical defense against thieves. Scholars still debate many closures because the same physical act, blocking an entrance with stone, can belong to very different intentions. Crypts and subterranean chambers beneath temples add another layer. In some traditions, underground rooms could preserve relics, sacred objects, cult equipment, foundation deposits, or images associated with divine presence. In others, they served as symbolic underworlds, places where rituals could dramatize death, renewal, fertility, or descent. Not every hidden chamber was used for secret ceremonies, and it is easy for modern imagination to run too far ahead of the evidence. Still, the architectural pattern is real. Ancient builders repeatedly created spaces where darkness, restriction, and sacred meaning were joined. These rooms did not need crowds. Their importance came from limited access. Initiation may also have shaped some underground spaces, though this must be approached carefully. Later mystery religions in the Mediterranean world, for example, placed great importance on restricted knowledge and controlled ritual experience. Some sacred caves and chambers may have been used in rites that changed a participant's status within a community. But because secrecy was part of the practice, and because texts are often late, fragmentary, or written by outsiders, no single explanation fully accounts for the archaeological remains. A chamber with benches, lamps, water basins, and unusual deposits may suggest ritual gathering, but the precise sequence of actions can remain beyond recovery. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world grows from this uncertainty. It is not only built of stone, it is built of rules: who may enter, at what time, after what preparation, under whose authority, with what object carried in the hands, with what danger if the boundary is crossed improperly. These questions leave fewer traces than walls, but they are central to understanding ancient underground space. A passage is not forbidden because it is physically impossible to enter. It is forbidden because a society gives meaning to the act of entering. In many places, natural caves were altered just enough to make them part of human order without removing their older power. Steps were cut, niches were carved, walls were smoothed, lamps were placed, offerings accumulated, water channels were guided. The result was not a fully artificial building and not a purely natural hollow, but something in between. That in-between quality mattered. A cave already seemed to belong to the earth by shaping it. People could make it usable without making it ordinary. The builder did not erase the mystery, he framed it. Rock-cut architecture takes this further. Instead of raising stones upward, ancient workers removed stone inward. They carved rooms out of cliffs, chambers under hills, corridors through bedrock, and tombs whose ceilings were the living mountain itself. The labour is easy to underestimate. Every wall is made by subtraction. Every chamber requires tools, planning, light, air, and the removal of debris. In hard stone, progress could be painfully slow, yet the result carries a special authority. A building made from stacked materials may fall apart when its joints fail. A chamber cut into bedrock feels as if it has always been waiting inside the earth. Such spaces could become terrifyingly durable. A palace may burn, a city wall may be pulled down, mud brick may dissolve into the soil, but a rock-cut chamber can survive political collapse, language change, conquest, religious transformation, and centuries of abandonment. Later people may enter it without knowing who made it. They may reuse it as a shelter, a stable, a shrine, a tomb, a hiding place, or a source of building stone. The original meaning fades, but the space remains. This is one reason the ancient underground gathers legend so easily. When architecture outlives memory, imagination rushes in to occupy the gap. The sacred dark also carries fear. Ancient people were not always reverent toward underground spaces. They could also regard them as dangerous, polluted, haunted, or unstable. Tombs could be protected by curses, legal threats, heavy stones, hidden entrances, or simple remoteness. Caves could be avoided except at certain times. Wells and shafts could kill by collapse or bad air. Mines could swallow labourers. The line between sacred and threatening was often thin. A place could be powerful because it was dangerous, and dangerous because it was powerful. That double nature is essential. The underground city is never merely a refuge, never merely a temple, never merely a tomb. It is a landscape of controlled risk. It offers water but may flood. It preserves the dead but invites violation. It hides treasure but attracts thieves. It shelters people but can collapse over them. It stages contact with divine or ancestral forces but requires rules to prevent that contact from becoming disorder. The forbidden quality is not decoration. It is a way of managing danger through architecture, ritual, and authority. As the ancient world becomes more urban, these older meanings follow the builders into increasingly complex spaces. Sacred caves become sanctuaries. Tomb shafts become royal statements. Wells become centres of settlement and story. Crypts beneath temples become hidden engines of ritual authority. Tunnels become routes not only through stone, but through social hierarchy. The surface city may belong to daylight, but its deepest claims are often made in darkness. And beneath that darkness waits another question, more practical and more astonishing. If ancient people imagined the underground as sacred, how far could they actually build into it? How much could they carve, drain, support, ventilate, conceal, and maintain with the tools available to them? The answer is not fantasy. It is written in chisel marks, quarry scars, water channels, smoke stains, and the stubborn precision of stone cut by hands that understood the earth better than modern arrogance sometimes allows. The builders beneath the earth do not begin with mystery. They begin with stone, water, labour, and the stubborn problem of moving through material that does not want to move. Every underground chamber, however sacred it later becomes, first requires a practical decision. Where will the entrance be placed? How hard is the rock? Where will the spoil be carried? How will the ceiling hold? How will smoke escape? How will water be kept out, or guided in, or stored without poisoning the air? The ancient world may surround these spaces with gods and prohibitions, but the work itself is physical, exacting and unforgiving. A tunnel cut badly does not become symbolic, it collapses. This is where the Forbidden City becomes more believable, not less. Ancient builders were capable of remarkable underground engineering because their societies had long experience with quarrying, mining, wells, drainage, and tomb construction. They knew how stone fractured, they knew how mud brick behaved under pressure, they knew how water moved through slopes and channels, they knew how to cut a shaft straight enough to reach a burial chamber, a spring, a storage space, or a hidden passage. Their tools were simple compared with modern machines, but simple does not mean crude. Bronze chisels, stone hammers, wooden levers, ropes, wedges, baskets, lamps, plumb lines, measuring cords, and patient human coordination could accomplish work that still feels improbable when standing inside it. The most impressive underground structures often grow from practical needs before they acquire legendary meanings. A city in a dry landscape must capture water. Rain may come rarely, violently, and wastefully unless roofs, courtyards, channels, and cisterns gather it. A settlement under threat may need storage protected from fire and raiders. A palace may require cool rooms for food, oil, wine, textiles, or valuables. A fortified place may need access to water without exposing people outside the walls during siege. These needs encourage people to think downward. The ground offers insulation, concealment, stability, and protection from heat. It is difficult to build there, but once the work is done, the earth itself becomes part of the architecture. Cisterns are among the quiet masterpieces of ancient engineering. They rarely inspire the same awe as pyramids, ziggurats, or temples, but without them many settlements could not endure. A cistern is not simply a hole for water. It must be shaped, sealed, cleaned, fed, protected from contamination, and placed where runoff can be controlled. Some are bell-shaped, some are rectangular chambers cut into rock, some are coated with plaster to prevent leakage. Some are connected by channels that make the surface city and the hidden city act as one organism. During drought, the most important place in a settlement may be a dark chamber below a courtyard, known not by grandeur but by survival. Drainage systems reveal another kind of intelligence. Ancient cities produce waste, floodwater, and runoff. Streets turn into streams after storms. Temples and palaces must protect foundations from water damage. In regions with seasonal rains, poorly managed drainage can destroy expensive architecture from below, so builders cut channels under paving, laid stone drains, carved gutters into bedrock, and directed water away from walls. These systems may seem humble, but they create hidden networks beneath daily life. A person walking across a plaza may never think of the channel below, yet the plaza survives because that channel exists. Underground passages can also arise from quarrying. A city needs stone, and stone often comes from the same hills, cliffs, and bedrock beneath or near the settlement. When builders cut blocks from the earth, they leave voids. Some quarries remain open scars, others become caves, chambers, or tunnels. Over time, abandoned quarry spaces may be reused for storage, refuge, burial, worship, or hiding. This reuse can confuse later interpretation. A chamber that looks sacred in one period may have begun as a practical extraction site. A passage later treated as secret may have first been a work route. Scholars still debate such cases because ancient spaces often have more than one life. Mines carry the story deeper and darker. To extract copper, tin, gold, silver, iron, salt, or precious stones. Ancient workers entered the earth with skill and danger. Mining required ventilation, lighting, drainage, support, and the organisation of labour in cramped conditions. It taught societies how to follow veins, brace unstable spaces, and read underground signs. The miner's world was not the same as the priest's underworld, or the king's burial chamber. Yet all three shared knowledge of descent. The earth could give wealth, but it demanded risk, bad air, collapse, flooding, exhaustion, and darkness made every underground workplace a negotiation with forces that could not be commanded by inscription alone. Royal tomb builders pushed underground engineering towards symbolic perfection. In Egypt's Valley of the Kings, for example, tomb corridors and chambers were cut into desert cliffs with increasing complexity over centuries. The aim was not simply to hide a corpse, it was to create a controlled afterlife landscape, a passage through stone shaped by theology, kingship, security, and art. In other regions, rock-cut tombs likewise turned geology into status. The dead did not merely lie under the earth, they occupied architecture made from the earth. The mountain, cliff, or bedrock became a vessel of memory. The surprising detail is how often underground construction depends on light. Darkness may be the emotional result, but it is never the working condition builders can simply accept. Every carved chamber requires lamps. Lamps require fuel. Fuel produces smoke. Smoke stains ceilings and consumes air. A long tunnel must be worked in sections, with workers managing visibility and breath as carefully as the direction of the cut. Soot marks on ceilings can reveal how spaces were used, how often lamps burned, and sometimes even where people paused. The sacred darkness admired by later visitors was produced by a very practical struggle against darkness during construction. Ventilation is another hidden problem. A shallow cellar may breathe easily, but deeper tunnels require air movement. Shafts, openings, staggered routes, and the natural pull of temperature differences can help. In some underground cities and refuges, vertical shafts serve multiple purposes at once: air, communication, access, and sometimes wells. The line between a ventilation shaft and a ritual shaft may not always be obvious later, especially if the space changes use. This is one of the reasons underground archaeology demands caution. A feature may look mysterious because its engineering purpose is no longer active. In places such as Cappadocia in central Anatolia, later underground complexes show how far human communities could go when geology cooperated. Soft volcanic tuff allowed extensive excavation, producing rooms, tunnels, storage areas, stables, ventilation shafts, wells, and defensive stone doors in underground settlements used across different periods. These complexes do not prove every legend of hidden ancient cities, and their dates and functions vary, but they demonstrate something important. Large-scale life beneath the surface was technically possible when the rock, social need, and labour organisation aligned. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world is not impossible because humans lacked ability. The harder questions are where, why, when, and how completely such spaces were used. Ancient builders also understood concealment. An entrance can be placed behind a wall, under a floor slab, inside a courtyard, beyond a false turn, or in a landscape feature that attracts no attention. A heavy stone can close a passage. A corridor can be narrowed for defence. A stair can be filled with rubble. A shaft can be capped and plastered over. Concealment does not require modern mechanisms. It requires knowledge of expectation. People hide doors where others are least likely to imagine a door should be. Yet the greatest concealment is time. Once a city burns, floods, shrinks, changes religion, changes language, or loses its ruling class, underground systems become vulnerable to forgetting. The people who know which passage leads to water may die or leave. The priests who understand a crypt's ritual meaning may be replaced. The workers who maintained drains may no longer be paid. A sealed chamber stops being forbidden in the social sense and becomes unreachable in the archaeological sense. The rule disappears, but the barrier remains. This is the strange fate of many underground works. They are built by intelligence, maintained by routine, transformed by belief, and finally hidden by neglect. Their builders may have intended them as practical, sacred, defensive, or secret, but time turns all these motives into a single silence. When modern explorers or archaeologists encounter them, the first temptation is to imagine a grand design behind every passage. Sometimes there was one. Sometimes the underground map is an accumulation of separate decisions made over centuries. A cistern connects to a drain, a quarry becomes a storehouse, a tomb cuts into an older chamber, a refuge expands during danger, a sealed corridor preserves a ritual nobody remembers. What survives in the record suggests not one impossible subterranean metropolis, but many overlapping underground worlds beneath ancient life. Their builders were not magicians. They were engineers, quarrymen, priests, rulers, miners, labourers, and planners working within the limits of material and belief. Their achievement is more impressive because it is human. They did not need fantasy to create darkness that still unsettles the mind. They needed tools, labour, fear, devotion, and reasons powerful enough to move stone out of the earth one basket at a time. And once such spaces existed, another problem appeared. How were they remembered? How were they recorded? A surface monument can carry inscriptions, images, and royal boasts, but hidden spaces are often absent from public texts. Their plans may never have been written down, or may have been kept in archives that burned, rotted, or were deliberately erased. The underground city could be built with precision and still leave behind no map clear enough for the future to follow. The most unsettling maps of the ancient world are not the maps that survive, but the ones that must once have existed in human memory and then disappeared. A city with underground chambers, water routes, crypts, storerooms, shafts, and blocked passages cannot function entirely by accident. Someone knows where the drain bends, someone knows which stone covers the access shaft, someone knows which corridor is safe after rain and which one fills with foul air. Someone knows where offerings are placed under a sanctuary, where a tomb entrance has been disguised, where an old quarry chamber has become a sealed store, where a priestly passage links one restricted court to another. Yet in many cases, that knowledge never reaches us in the form we want. It is carried in bodies, routines, offices, families, craft traditions, and whispered instructions, and those are the first archives to vanish. The ancient world did make plans, lists, accounts, boundary records, inventories, and building inscriptions, but survival is brutally uneven. Clay can last when fired or buried, while papyrus, parchment, wood, textile, and painted plaster often decay unless conditions are unusually dry, sealed, or protected. A temple archive may burn, a palace record room may be looted, a conqueror may preserve tax accounts but destroy royal names. Later builders may reuse inscribed blocks upside down in a wall, not because they wish to send a riddle to the future, but because good stone is useful. What remains is not a complete library of ancient intention. It is a damaged selection produced by climate, violence, accident, and neglect. This is why underground places so often become surrounded by rumour. A surface ruin can be sketched, measured, and seen by anyone willing to stand before it. A buried passage is different. If it is closed, flooded, collapsed, or hidden under later structures, its existence may be known only indirectly. One generation may remember that a shaft lies under a courtyard, another may remember only that the courtyard is dangerous, a third may turn danger into taboo, a fourth may inherit only a story of a sealed gate no one should open. The evidence remains incomplete, but the transformation is believable. Practical knowledge becomes social warning, and social warning becomes legend. Fragmentary texts can make the problem worse as much as better. An inscription may mention a lower chamber, a hidden place, a pure room, a house beneath, a sealed store, or a road of the god. But ancient terminology does not always map neatly onto modern categories. A phrase that sounds like a secret tunnel may refer to a ritual route, a storeroom, a shrine, a tomb, a canal, or a symbolic underworld described in religious language. Translation itself can sharpen uncertainty into false clarity. A single word may carry administrative, architectural, and sacred meanings at once. Scholars still debate such terms because language survives without the vanished buildings that gave it everyday precision. Even when ancient records are more specific, they often speak from the viewpoint of authority. Kings boast of temples restored, canals dug, walls raised, gates plated, enemies crushed, gods honoured, and foundations made eternal. They rarely provide the kind of practical plan a modern investigator wants. A royal inscription may say that a sanctuary was renewed from its foundations, but not describe every earlier chamber found beneath it. A temple inventory may list vessels and offerings, but not the route through which they were carried. A burial text may describe cosmic geography in rich detail, while leaving the physical tomb's construction sequence only partly visible. The ancient record is not silent, but it does not answer modern questions on modern terms. Oral tradition adds another layer. Around many old places, stories persist of hidden chambers, buried treasure, secret wells, tunnels to distant hills, sleeping kings, forbidden doors, or books concealed before disaster. Most such stories cannot be treated as direct evidence. Popular imagination expands underground spaces because darkness invites expansion. A small chamber becomes a tunnel becomes a road becomes a city, a blocked doorway becomes proof of a hidden kingdom. No single explanation fully accounts for how these legends grow, but a pattern is clear. Underground architecture creates empty space in the mind, and empty space attracts narrative. Still, it would be a mistake to dismiss every legend as nonsense. Sometimes oral memory preserves a distorted trace of real features. A tale of a hidden waterway may point toward an old cistern system. A story about a sealed room beneath a shrine may preserve awareness of a crypt, tomb, or foundation deposit. A local warning against digging in a certain mound may reflect collapses, burials, or older sacred restrictions. Archaeology has occasionally found that beneath exaggerated stories lies a smaller but genuine archaeological core. The challenge is to respect possibility without surrendering caution. The Forbidden City is not proven by legend, but legend may show where the ancient landscape has not stopped speaking. The absence of maps also reflects secrecy by design. Restricted spaces are not always meant to be widely documented. If a passage protects a treasury, archive, escape route, sacred object, or royal burial, making its plan public defeats part of its purpose. Knowledge may be held by a narrow group builders, priests, guards, royal officials, or hereditary specialists. When that group disappears, loses power, or chooses silence, the map disappears with it. This kind of secrecy is hard for archaeology to detect because it leaves a negative trace. We see the chamber, but not the rule that governed access. We see the blocked door, but not the names of those allowed to pass before it was blocked. There is also the ordinary secrecy of labour. Builders know buildings intimately in ways rulers do not. The quarryman knows which wall was difficult. The plasterer knows where water seeped through. The worker hauling debris knows which shaft connected to another chamber. The maintenance crew knows the drain better than the priest who walks above it. But the records that survive most often come from elites, not from the hands that kept underground systems alive. What survives in the record suggests a world planned by kings, but maintained by people whose knowledge was rarely written down. When those routines stop, the underground becomes illegible with surprising speed. Later occupation further erases the map. Ancient cities do not usually freeze at the moment of their greatest mystery. They are repaired, conquered, rebuilt, abandoned, resettled, quarried, farmed, fortified, and excavated by people who have their own needs. A Roman drain may cut through an older chamber, A medieval cellar may reuse an ancient wall, a modern road may seal a tomb entrance without anyone noticing, farmers may level mounds. Treasure hunters may break into sealed rooms and remove objects before scholars ever see them. Even careful archaeology sometimes arrives after centuries of disturbance. The lost map is not lost once, it is lost repeatedly. And yet the missing map is precisely what gives the Forbidden City its power. The underground world is not simply hidden by stone, it is hidden by broken memory. Its geography exists in fragments: a tunnel here, a sealed shaft there, a water channel under a street, a crypt beneath a temple, a chamber detected by instruments but not yet entered, a legend attached to a hill, a text whose meaning shifts depending on one uncertain word. Put together too boldly, these fragments become fantasy. Kept too separate, they lose the pattern that ancient people themselves may have understood. The careful path lies between. The city beneath the ancient world, then, must be approached as a map of absences. Its blank spaces are not empty. They are places where records failed, where secrecy worked, where materials decayed, where later builders erased earlier ones, and where the underground resisted easy knowledge. The deeper the story goes, the clearer one thing becomes. The most important gates are not always the ones still standing in stone. Some are made of missing plans, vanished offices, forgotten rituals, and instructions that were never meant to outlive the people who carried them. And where the maps disappear, the sealed gates begin to matter even more. A blocked entrance is a different kind of document. It may not tell us what lies beyond, but it tells us that someone decided the passage should end. A sealed gate is one of the most powerful objects in archaeology because it is both evidence and refusal. It stands between the known and the unknown, between the space already entered and the space still protected by darkness, rubble, fear, collapse, or intention. An open doorway invites interpretation, a sealed one interrupts it. The stones say that movement once mattered here, and then, at some later moment, movement was stopped. Someone closed the route, someone blocked the threshold. Someone decided that whatever lay beyond should no longer belong to ordinary passage. This is where the underground city becomes most difficult to read. A blocked entrance can look dramatic, but its meaning is not automatically mysterious. Ancient builders sealed spaces for many reasons, and the first task is to resist the easy story. A corridor may be filled because it has become unstable. A chamber may be closed because its ritual use is complete. A tomb may be blocked to protect the dead from thieves. A tunnel may be abandoned because water makes it useless. A passage may be hidden during war, then never reopened because the people who knew it are killed, exiled, or absorbed into another population. A doorway may be sealed by later builders who do not understand it and simply want a solid foundation. The same physical act can carry fear, reverence, practicality, or ignorance. Still, deliberate closure has a particular atmosphere. Archaeologists can sometimes distinguish between random collapse and intentional blocking by the arrangement of stones, plaster, fill, debris, or architectural finishing. A natural collapse is chaotic. A deliberate seal often has edges, packing, layers, or a surface meant to disguise or formalize the closure. Sometimes the fill contains selected objects. Sometimes it includes broken tools, pottery, animal bones, ash, or offerings. Sometimes the blocking is rough and hurried. Sometimes it is careful enough to feel ceremonial, and the evidence remains incomplete, but the difference matters. When people take time to close a place properly, closure itself becomes part of the story. Ancient ritual closure is especially important. Buildings, shrines, and sacred spaces were not always simply abandoned when their use ended. In some cases, they were decommissioned through acts that transformed them from active places into remembered or neutralized ones. Objects might be removed, broken, buried, or covered. Floors might be filled, entrances might be sealed, fire might be used, a chamber might be packed with earth, not because the builders lacked imagination, but because earth returned the space to the body of the landscape. The modern mind often treats burial as loss. Ancient people may also have treated it as completion. This idea changes the way a forbidden underground city must be imagined. If a hidden complex is sealed, it does not always mean someone is trying to hide a scandal, a treasure, or a forbidden truth. Sometimes a community closes a space because it has done its work. A tomb is sealed after the dead are placed inside. A shrine may be sealed after a cult changes or a new sacred center replaces it. A ritual chamber may be filled when its power becomes too old, too dangerous, or no longer ritually usable. Scholars still debate such closures because intention is hard to prove, but the pattern appears often enough to be taken seriously. Ancient people did not always preserve old spaces by keeping them open. They preserved them by making them inaccessible. Tombs show this most clearly. A burial chamber may be sealed with stone slabs, mud brick, plaster, rubble, or carefully disguised blocking. The seal protects the dead, but it also marks a boundary that should not be crossed casually. Grave robbers understood this boundary very well, and so did the people who tried to stop them. Some tombs include false passages, hidden shafts, heavy blocking stones, or entrances placed where they were difficult to detect. Yet tomb robbery was common in many regions, sometimes occurring not centuries later but within living memory of the burial. This uncomfortable fact gives sealed gates a second life. A tomb may be sealed by mourners, broken by robbers, repaired by officials, reused by later burials, and finally sealed again by collapse. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world is full of these interrupted histories. A doorway may have been opened and closed more than once. A corridor that looks untouched may contain traces of ancient intrusion. A chamber believed to be sealed forever may have been entered by thieves in antiquity and then concealed by later debris. The first modern opening of a sealed passage is not always the first opening. This is why archaeology relies on small clues, tool marks, footprints, lamp soot. Broken seals, disturbed floor layers, displaced stones, and objects left in places where they do not belong. The drama of a sealed gate lies not only in what is behind it, but in whether the seal is telling the truth. There is also the problem of fear. Some passages were closed because the underground could become physically dangerous. Water can turn a useful tunnel into a death trap. Earthquakes can crack ceilings and shift foundations. Bad air can gather in deep chambers. Fires can consume oxygen. Flood sediments can choke corridors until only a narrow upper void remains. Ancient people did not need modern geology to recognize danger. If a passage killed workers, collapsed during rain, or produced foul air, it could acquire a reputation that outlasted the technical cause. A sealed entrance might begin as a safety measure and later become a taboo. Earthquakes deserve special attention because they can make underground evidence ambiguous. A quake may collapse ceilings, block corridors, tilt walls, and open new cracks. Later people may seal damaged areas to stabilize a structure above. In a city built over many older layers, one damaged underground chamber can threaten a temple floor, a palace court, or a defensive wall. Closing it may be an act of engineering rather than secrecy. Yet after generations, the repair disappears into legend. People remember that something below was closed, but not that the reason was structural failure. The city becomes haunted by its own maintenance. War creates another pattern. During invasion or siege, hidden spaces can become refuges, caches, escape routes, or traps. Valuables may be buried. Sacred objects may be concealed. Archives may be hidden in haste. People may retreat into cellars, tunnels, caves, or underground shelters. Some return after danger passes, others do not. A sealed passage in such a context can carry the pressure of emergency. It may be closed quickly, with mixed debris, broken objects, and signs of panic. Or it may be closed carefully after the crisis, when survivors decide that what happened below should not be reopened. No single explanation fully accounts for these moments, because war destroys both buildings and witnesses. The most intriguing sealed gates are those that appear unnecessary. A corridor is carefully cut, then blocked. A chamber is completed, then filled. A stairway descends, then stops behind deliberate masonry. These are the places where interpretation becomes tense. Was the project abandoned? Was the chamber repurposed? Was the route symbolic rather than functional? Was it a decoy? Was it closed after a ritual cycle ended? Was something removed before sealing, leaving only the architecture behind? The absence of an obvious purpose does not prove a secret, but it does reveal that ancient decisions do not always align with modern expectations of efficiency. A lesser known but important detail is that sealing can be a form of memory rather than erasure. To bury a sacred structure, to fill a chamber, or to close a gate may keep the place present in communal knowledge, even while removing it from daily use. The location may remain known to priests, elders, officials, or descendants. Offerings may continue above the sealed space. A new building may be oriented toward it. A later shrine may stand directly over it, not because the older one was forgotten, but because it was powerful enough to anchor the new. In such cases, the underground is not lost, it is made foundational. This makes the sealed gate a paradox. It hides and preserves, it forbids and protects. It ends movement but deepens meaning. It can signal fear, respect, danger, exhaustion, defeat, renewal, or control. Modern viewers often imagine that every sealed passage begs to be opened, but ancient builders may have believed the opposite, that some spaces achieve their purpose only when closed. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world is therefore not merely a maze waiting for discovery. It is a landscape of decisions. Every blocked stair, packed shaft, plastered doorway, collapsed tunnel, and sealed chamber records a moment when people changed their relationship with the underground. They may have abandoned it, feared it, sanctified it, defended it, or deliberately removed it from ordinary time. What survives in stone is the gesture. The motive flickers just beyond reach. And behind many of those gestures stands a more human question. Who had the authority to close the gate in the ancient world? Sealing a passage was not only a technical act, it could be a statement of power. The people who controlled access to hidden places also controlled the stories, resources, rituals, and dangers those places contained. The people who control the hidden door control more than a room. They control the right to know. In the ancient world, this right is rarely distributed evenly. A city may be crowded with thousands of lives, but its deepest spaces are often guarded by a narrow circle of priests, kings, scribes, officials, builders, and attendants whose authority depends on boundaries that others cannot cross. The forbidden underground is not only a place beneath stone, it is a social arrangement. It turns architecture into hierarchy. A priesthood does not need an enormous secret to become powerful. It needs controlled access to sacred routines. It needs calendars, offerings, correct gestures, ritual objects, inherited words, and spaces that ordinary people approach only from the outside in the deepest chamber of a temple. the crypt beneath a shrine, the sealed room where divine equipment is stored, the passage used during certain ceremonies, the shaft where offerings disappear into the earth. Each of these places can strengthen the sense that sacred order depends on specialists. The god may belong to the community, but the route to the god is managed by the few. This does not mean every priest was a manipulator or every restricted chamber was a trick. That is too modern, too simple, and too unfair to the complexity of ancient religion. Many priests likely understood themselves as caretakers of dangerous responsibilities rather than owners of secrets. Sacred objects could be treated as powerful, vulnerable, or ritually sensitive. Certain spaces might require purification before entry. Some rites might be restricted not to deceive the public. But because their meaning depended on separation, the evidence remains incomplete, and intention is always difficult to recover. But restricted access was not an accident. It was one of the ways sacred power became organised. Kings learned the same lesson in political form. A ruler's palace is a machine of controlled approach. The visitor moves through gates, guards, courts, waiting spaces, and thresholds before reaching the ruler, if reaching him at all. Below or behind this visible choreography lie treasuries, archives, storage rooms, private chambers, secure routes, and perhaps emergency exits known only to trusted officials. The palace's grandeur is meant to be seen, but its working organs are not grain. Weapons, tribute, seals, documents, and precious materials must be stored somewhere, and the places that hold them become political nerve centres. Whoever controls those rooms controls the state in a very literal sense. Archives are especially important because they make power durable. A clay tablet, papyrus roll, seal impression, or inscribed label can turn a harvest, a debt, a boundary, or a royal command into something that outlives speech. But archives also create vulnerability. Records can expose wealth, obligations, land claims, temple property, royal decisions, and networks of loyalty. They must be protected from theft, fire, moisture, and enemies. Some archives were housed above ground. Some in palace or temple rooms, some in restricted administrative areas, and some may have been hidden or moved during crisis. What survives in the record suggests that information itself could be treated as a guarded resource, not merely as paperwork. Beneath a temple or palace, a small sealed room containing documents might be less visually impressive than a colossal statue, yet far more dangerous to those who wish to challenge authority. A list of debts, a record of offerings, a treaty, a land grant, a royal genealogy, or an inventory of treasure can hold a kingdom together as firmly as stone. When later legends imagine hidden libraries under ancient cities, they often exaggerate wildly, but they are not born from nothing. Ancient states did preserve knowledge in controlled spaces, and the loss of those spaces has left one of the deepest wounds in historical memory. The underground could also serve initiation. In many societies, access to restricted knowledge marks a change in status. A person who enters a forbidden chamber and returns is not the same socially as before. The passage itself becomes proof of belonging. This may involve religious training, priestly rank, royal legitimacy, military brotherhood, or elite association. Archaeology can rarely prove initiation with confidence unless texts, objects, and architecture align. And scholars still debate many proposed cases, but the underlying principle is widely recognisable. Power often requires thresholds, and underground thresholds are among the most persuasive because they make separation physical. The body remembers descent. A candidate led down a narrow stair, through darkness, past stone walls damp with age, toward a chamber lit only by oil lamps, experiences authority not as an idea but as pressure, silence, and controlled fear. Even without dramatic theatrics, the architecture does much of the work. The world above falls away, the ordinary city disappears, the initiate stands inside a place that most people will never see. The memory of that entry can bind a person to the group more strongly than any public announcement. This is why underground spaces are so effective for restricted rites. They make secrecy feel older than the people enforcing it. There is a harsher side as well. Hidden spaces can protect communities, but they can also hide coercion. Prisons, holding rooms, forced labour areas, and places of punishment do not always leave clear archaeological signatures, especially if they were later cleaned, reused, or destroyed. Ancient states could be violent, and power did not always wear ceremonial robes. A chamber beneath a palace might hold stores in one period, and captives in another. A tunnel might serve escape for elites while ordinary people faced the city's fall above. A sealed room might preserve offerings, or conceal the evidence of crisis. No single explanation fully accounts for every restricted space, and the possibility of darker uses must remain part of the picture. Control over sacred darkness could also shape public belief without requiring public access. A priest emerging from a restricted chamber with an image, a vessel of water, a flame, a tablet, or an omen, carries the authority of the unseen back into the visible world. The crowd does not need to witness every act for the act to matter. In fact, not seeing may strengthen belief. The hidden process gives weight to the visible result. A closed door allows the imagination to complete what the eyes cannot. Kings exploited a similar structure through ancestry. Royal tombs, burial chambers, and ancestral cult spaces could anchor a dynasty beneath the city or near its sacred centre. The dead king below legitimizes the living ruler above. The palace or temple may stand partly as a bridge between generations, with the living court performing authority on foundations made sacred by buried bodies, offerings, or remembered predecessors. This does not apply uniformly everywhere. And burial customs vary enormously, but the political use of the dead is a recurring ancient habit. Ancestors can be made into foundations in both symbolic and architectural senses. The surprising detail is that secrecy does not always require total concealment. Sometimes everyone knows that a restricted underground place exists. Its power comes not from being unknown, but from being inaccessible. A city's people may know there is a crypt beneath the temple, a treasury behind sealed doors, a royal tomb under a mound, a sacred spring reached by a forbidden stair, or a passage used only in crisis. Such knowledge can circulate without weakening authority. The boundary becomes part of civic imagination. The unseen place helps define the city precisely because it remains unseen. This creates a peculiar kind of urban geography. The city above is mapped by streets, markets, gates, neighbourhoods, and monuments. The city below is mapped by privilege. For one person, a stairway is only a rumour. For another, it is a workplace. For another, it is a sacred route. For another, it is a danger to be avoided. The same underground chamber can hold different meanings depending on rank, gender, office, season, ritual status, or political moment. The Forbidden City is therefore not simply below the ancient world. It is distributed through relationships. Over time, those relationships can break. A dynasty falls. A priestly lineage ends. A conqueror takes the city but not the old ritual knowledge. A new religion condemns, ignores, or repurposes earlier sacred spaces. An archive becomes unreadable because the script changes, a treasury is emptied, a tomb is robbed, a passage remains, but the authority that made it meaningful dissolves. Then the underground space enters a strange afterlife. It is still there, but its social key has been lost. This may be the deepest reason hidden places become mysterious. Not because ancient people were more mysterious than modern people, but because their systems of permission have vanished. We find the door without the rule. We find the chamber without the office. We find the seal without the ceremony. We find the passage without the fear that once made feet hesitate at its entrance. The stone survives, but the human permission structure around the stone is gone. The Forbidden City beneath the ancient world is built from that loss. Priests, kings, scribes, guards, workers, mourners, and rulers all shaped it, each for different reasons. Some sought divine order, some sought security, some sought legitimacy, some sought survival, some simply carried out instructions passed down through institutions older than themselves. Together, they turned the underground into a hidden extension of power, a place where sacred authority and political control could meet without needing to explain themselves fully to the surface. But power is never the only force under a city. Beneath the priests and kings, beneath the sealed rooms and guarded thresholds, there is something older, less obedient, and more essential. Water moves where it can, it seeps through cracks, fills cisterns, feeds wells, undermines walls, preserves deposits, destroys passages, and remembers landscapes older than any dynasty. If the Forbidden City has a secret master, it may not be the king or the priest at all. It may be water in the dark. Water is the oldest architect beneath the ancient world. Long before a city cuts its first drain or lines its first cistern, water has already been working in darkness, dissolving limestone, opening cracks, shaping caverns, gathering in underground pockets, and moving quietly beneath plains that seem dry on the surface. Human builders do not invent this hidden world. They discover it, imitate it, fight it, and depend on it. A forbidden city beneath the earth may be made by hands, but its deepest logic often follows the path of water. Every ancient settlement lives or dies by water management. A city can survive a weak ruler longer than it can survive a failed water system. It can endure a damaged wall, a lost battle, or a poor harvest for a season. But if wells dry, drains fail, canals silt up, or cisterns become foul, daily life begins to come apart with frightening speed. This is one reason underground architecture becomes so important. Water must be captured when it comes, protected when it is scarce, guided when it is excessive, and hidden when enemies gather outside the walls. The surface city may celebrate gods of storm, river, sea, and fertility, but beneath the streets, practical channels decide whether those prayers have a chance of becoming survival. In dry landscapes, cisterns are acts of foresight. Rainfall may be brief and violent, arriving in storms that run uselessly over stone unless someone is prepared for them. Roofs, courtyards, gutters, carved channels, settling basins, and plastered chambers turn a moment of weather into months of stored life. The people who build such systems are not thinking only of architecture. They are thinking of thirst in advance. They are planning for the season when the sky closes and every jar, every underground tank, every shadowed reservoir becomes part of the city's pulse. A visitor may admire the temple above, but the people who live there know that the darker chamber below can be more important than the tallest column. Some cisterns are simple, others become astonishingly elaborate, with columns supporting underground roofs, waterproof plaster sealing walls, steps descending to water levels that rise and fall with the seasons, and channels arranged to filter mud before it reaches the main storage. In later ancient and early medieval cities, great subterranean reservoirs could look almost like inverted basilicas, forests of columns standing in dim, reflected light. They are not forbidden in the same sense as a royal tomb, yet access to them is controlled because contamination is dangerous and water is wealth. A city's water supply is both public necessity and strategic secret. In a siege, knowing where hidden water flows can mean the difference between surrender and endurance. Wells create a more intimate relationship with the underground. A well is a vertical negotiation between human need and geological chance. Dig too shallow, and it fails in drought. Dig poorly, and it collapses. Dig in the wrong place, and there is nothing but labour and disappointment. A successful well becomes a centre of settlement because it brings an unseen world within reach. People lower jars into darkness and raise up life, over generations. The repeated motion can make a well feel almost personal, a throat through which the earth answers the city. Around such places, stories often gather because dependence easily becomes reverence. But water is never only generous, it is also destructive, patient, and strangely secretive. Underground water can undermine foundations without announcing itself. It can soften mud brick, dissolve mortar, crack plaster, and turn a stable chamber into a hazard. A buried passage that was dry for centuries can flood after a channel shifts or an earthquake changes drainage. A tomb meant to preserve the dead can become a basin. A sacred crypt can fill with silt. A sealed shaft can trap damp air until paintings peel, wood rots, metals corrode, and inscriptions blur. The same earth that protects can also erase. This is one of the great contradictions of the buried city. Underground spaces survive because they are sheltered from wind, sunlight, and surface violence, but they are vulnerable to water in ways that monuments above ground are not. A surface wall may stand weathered but visible. A flooded chamber becomes inaccessible. A tunnel filled with sediment may disappear so completely that only geophysical survey hints at its outline. Ancient people knew this danger. Drains, sump pits, sloped floors. Waterproof coatings and overflow channels all show attempts to manage moisture. Yet no system stays perfect forever. Maintenance is the hidden religion of urban survival, and when maintenance stops, water resumes its older authority. In river civilizations, the relationship becomes even more complicated. Mesopotamian cities depend on canals, levees, irrigation ditches, and drainage systems that require constant labour. The great rivers bring fertility, but also salinity, flooding, erosion, and political tension over control of channels. Egypt's Nile follows a different rhythm, more predictable in its ancient flood cycle, yet still demanding measurement, storage, and coordination. The Indus cities show impressive concern with wells, bathing areas, drainage, and urban water management, though scholars still debate many aspects of their social and ritual meanings. Across these worlds, water is not just a resource. It is infrastructure, calendar, danger, and authority. The hidden water systems beneath ancient cities often reveal a kind of practical genius that royal inscriptions understate. Drains under streets in some urban centres were covered, accessible for cleaning, and integrated with houses or public areas. Wells could appear in great numbers, suggesting household or neighbourhood-level access rather than a single centralised supply. Channels might carry wastewater away from living spaces, not always perfectly by modern standards, but with an awareness that stagnant filth threatens health, smell, and dignity. These systems are easy to overlook because they do not glitter. They are not heroic architecture. They are the quiet proof that ancient urban life required disciplined attention to the unseen. Water also shapes sacred geography. Springs emerging from caves, pools beneath temples, underground rivers, and ritual basins all blur the line between engineering and belief. A spring can be both a hydrological fact and a divine sign. A pool can be both storage and purification. A channel can move water physically while also moving symbolic power from a sacred source into a ritual setting. No single explanation fully accounts for every water feature, because usefulness and meaning often coexist. Modern categories separate plumbing from religion more sharply than many ancient societies appear to have done. For them, a life-giving flow from the ground could be practical precisely because it was sacred, and sacred because it was practical. There is a lesser-known kind of hidden city created by qanats and similar underground water channels. These systems, developed and used across parts of Iran and beyond, tap groundwater from higher ground and carry it gently through sloping tunnels toward fields and settlements. From the surface, they may appear only as lines of small shafts crossing a dry landscape. Beneath, they form long artificial rivers in darkness. Their construction requires surveying skill, cooperation, maintenance, and deep knowledge of terrain. They are not cities in themselves, yet they make cities possible. They show how an entire landscape can have a visible face and an invisible circulatory system below. Water can also explain why some underground places become forbidden after once being useful. A cistern becomes contaminated, a well becomes associated with disease or death, a tunnel floods and traps workers, a sacred spring changes flow or dries, a drainage passage fills with waste and poisonous air. The technical failure becomes a social boundary. People stop entering, then warn others not to enter. Then later generations remember only that the place is dangerous. What begins as hydrology becomes taboo. The forbidden gate may not guard treasure. It may guard a bad memory of water. In times of siege, hidden water becomes one of the most valuable secrets a city possesses. Attackers can cut aqueducts, poison wells outside the walls, or wait for thirst to do what weapons cannot. Defenders who can reach a protected spring, a covered cistern, or a tunnel leading to water hold an advantage invisible from the enemy camp. This gives underground water systems military importance. A passage to a spring may be disguised, a reservoir may be hidden under a fortress. Access may be restricted to prevent panic, waste, or betrayal. In such moments, the city below is not symbolic, it is strategic survival. Yet water also carries a memory of catastrophe. Flood deposits in cities can mark sudden inundation, neglected drainage, river shifts, storms, or long-term environmental pressure. Silt layers and chambers may reveal that a place stood open to water after abandonment. Mineral deposits on walls can show changing water levels. The absence of expected water can matter too: a dry well, an unfinished channel, a cistern abandoned before completion. Scholars still debate many ancient collapses in part because water leaves evidence that can be powerful but difficult to interpret. Drought, flood, salinization, and changing river courses rarely act alone. They interact with politics, trade, warfare, disease, and social strain. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world therefore has a pulse, and that pulse is wet stone, dripping plaster, silted channels, wells lined by worn steps, and cisterns whose ceilings still hold smoke stains from the lamps of maintenance workers. The hidden city is not just where priests guard mysteries or kings hide wealth. It is where the ordinary miracle of survival is stored, moved, filtered, and defended. The people above may speak of divine favour, royal strength, or ancestral protection, but beneath them, water keeps its own account. And when water's account turns against a city, the signs may appear slowly at first: a damp wall, a cracked foundation, a well that tastes wrong, a drain that no longer clears after rain, a cistern that silts faster than it can be cleaned, a tunnel closed because the air inside feels heavy. These are small warnings, easy to ignore when temples still stand and markets still open. But hidden systems fail before monuments fall. By the time the surface world notices, the underground may already be losing its battle with the earth. From there, the story darkens. Water is not the only force capable of silencing the buried city. Fire can race through palaces. Earthquakes can break stone in an instant. Invasion can empty streets. Drought can scatter populations. Climate can redraw the edge between settlement and desert. A city beneath the ancient world may be sealed by ritual or secrecy, but it can also be sealed by disaster, when the living no longer return to open the gates. The silence of an ancient underground city rarely arrives all at once. More often, it gathers in stages, quietly, almost politely, while the world above still believes itself alive. A crack opens across a plastered wall and is patched. A drain blocks after a storm and is cleared. A storage chamber smells damp, so grain is moved elsewhere. A stair becomes unsafe, then inconvenient, then forgotten. The city continues because cities are stubborn. Markets reopen after floods. Temples resume offerings after fire. Officials rewrite records after invasion. Families rebuild houses over old foundations and call it recovery. Yet beneath this persistence, the underground systems begin to fail in ways that are difficult to see, until too much has already been lost. Earthquakes are among the most sudden agents of that loss. In a few moments, a city's hidden architecture can be transformed beyond recognition. Roof slabs shift. Bedrock chambers crack. Columns in underground reservoirs tilt. Doorways jam. Shafts collapse into themselves. A passage that once connected two sacred spaces becomes a wall of rubble. Above ground, people may remember the shaking through fallen statues, broken houses, or burned districts where lamps overturned and fires spread. Below ground, the damage can be more treacherous. A chamber may remain partly open but unstable. A corridor may appear passable while its ceiling is ready to fall. A blocked stair may preserve not a secret, but the last responsible decision of people who looked into darkness and understood that returning there meant death. Fire leaves a different signature. Underground spaces do not burn like forests or wooden roofs, yet they can hold the memory of fire with extraordinary intimacy. Smoke darkens ceilings, heat reddens clay, charred beams collapse into rooms, stored oil, textiles, wood, and grain can feed flames in spaces where air is limited and escape is difficult, in palaces and administrative centres. Fire can destroy archives while also preserving some clay tablets by baking them harder than ordinary use ever would. This is one of archaeology's cruel ironies: disaster can become preservation. The same blaze that ends a bureaucracy may save fragments of its records for strangers thousands of years later. A burned surface city can also seal what lies beneath it. When roofs collapse, when mud brick walls slump, when later rains turn ash and clay into compact layers, entrances vanish. A passage below a palace may survive physically, but lose all practical connection to the living world. If the ruling institution is gone, no one may know or care where the lower rooms are. If survivors return, they may build over them. If enemies occupy the site, they may reuse only what is obvious. Underground systems depend on maintenance, and maintenance depends on continuity. Once the human chain breaks, even the best-built hidden architecture begins to drift toward oblivion. Invasion and war make this break especially violent. Ancient cities often experience conquest not as a single cinematic fall, but as a sequence of fear, shortage, negotiation, destruction, looting, and reorganization. Some inhabitants flee before the final attack, some hide valuables, some conceal sacred objects, some retreat into cellars, caves, tunnels, or fortified inner zones. In certain cases, underground spaces may become shelters, but shelter can turn into a trap if entrances are blocked. Fires consume air, or attackers know where to search. What survives in the record suggests that hidden rooms could protect life and wealth, but no single explanation fully accounts for what happened in each crisis. The underground is generous to survivors and merciless to those who misjudge it. There is an especially haunting kind of abandonment created by hurried concealment. A cache of metal objects buried under a floor, jars hidden in a pit, documents stored away and never retrieved, a doorway blocked with rough stones rather than formal masonry. These are not always signs of ritual closure. Sometimes they are the archaeology of people expecting to come back. The most painful thing about such deposits is their unfinished quality. They imply a future that did not happen. Someone hid what mattered, or what could be carried no farther, and trusted that memory, family, or victory would reopen the place. Instead, silence did. Climate works more slowly, but its consequences can be just as final. Drought can weaken the agricultural base that feeds cities. Shifting rivers can strand canals. Salinization can reduce crop yields in irrigated lands. Repeated poor harvests can strain political authority, increase debt, encourage migration, and make maintenance labour harder to organise. Scholars still debate the exact role of climate in many ancient collapses, because environmental stress rarely acts alone. A drought does not topple a civilization by itself like a hammer striking a vase. It presses on existing cracks in equality, warfare, overextended administration, fragile trade, poor leadership, disease, and local resentment. But underground systems feel the pressure early. Wells drop, cisterns empty, drains fill because workers are needed elsewhere, storage rooms stand bare. When a city shrinks, the underground shrinks with it, but unevenly. A once central district may be abandoned while a smaller population survives nearby. Temples may lose income and close outer courts. Palaces may become ruins while ordinary houses continue among them. Some underground rooms are reused in practical ways, stripped of old meaning. A sacred chamber becomes storage. A tomb becomes shelter. A drain becomes a refuse pit. A cistern becomes a dump. This reuse is not always disrespect. It is survival. Later people living among ruins often treat the past as a supply of space and material. Stone is stone. A cool chamber is useful. A sealed room can be opened if no living authority remains to forbid it. Yet some places are avoided. Ruins can become dangerous, haunted, polluted, unlucky, or simply inconvenient. A collapsed tunnel may develop a reputation. A tomb robbed long ago may still be feared. A flooded chamber may be left alone because animals die near it. An old shrine may be respected even by people who no longer practice its rituals. The Forbidden City is therefore fragmented after collapse. Some parts are reused, some plundered, some sealed, some feared, some forgotten. And some preserved accidentally because nobody has a reason to disturb them. Earth itself completes the work. Wind brings dust, rain carries silt, plants take root in cracks, animals burrow, mud brick melts into rounded mounds. Stone falls and is buried. Floods lay new layers across old streets. Human occupation resumes above, sometimes after centuries, with no clear knowledge of what lies below. The city becomes a landscape. A sacred precinct becomes a hill. A palace becomes a quarry. A stairway becomes a void detected only when the ground gives way. The ancient underground, once managed by priests, kings, workers, and engineers, returns to the slower administration of geology. This is why disaster does not only destroy evidence, it edits evidence. Fire preserves some tablets and consumes others. Collapse protects one chamber while crushing another. Flood deposits seal a floor but erase organic remains. Looters open a tomb and leave behind only what they do not value. Later builders preserve an old wall by building over it, while destroying another to make room for a new foundation. The record that reaches us is not a fair sample of the past. It is a survivor of accidents. The evidence remains incomplete not because the ancient world was empty, but because survival is selective and often strange. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world vanishes. Then, through a partnership of human failure and natural force, secrecy narrows knowledge, disaster breaks continuity, water invades, fire hardens and erases, earthquakes rearrange stone, climate weakens the systems that once paid workers to maintain the hidden routes, war empties offices and interrupts rituals. Later generations reuse what they can and forget what they cannot. By the time memory turns into legend. The underground has already changed from living infrastructure into archaeological puzzle. But silence is not the end of the story. It is the condition that makes discovery possible. A sealed chamber, a collapsed corridor, a buried reservoir, a hidden foundation deposit, a forgotten drain under a street these survive because the world moved on without fully consuming them. Modern archaeology enters not as a conqueror of mystery, but as a narrow beam of light in a space shaped by loss. The question is no longer only what the ancient builders hid. It is what time has hidden from everyone, including them. The archaeologist's light is always smaller than the darkness around it. It may come from a lamp at the end of a rope, a flashlight held against damp stone, a camera lowered through a narrow shaft, or a screen glowing with the ghostly lines of a remote sensing scan. However advanced the tool becomes, the feeling is ancient a person at the edge of a hidden space, trying to understand what lies beyond without destroying the very evidence they hope to read. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world does not surrender itself like a monument in an open field. It has to be approached through fragments, shadows, signals, and restraint. Modern discovery often begins with the least dramatic clue, a slight depression in the ground, a draft of cool air from a crack, a patch of vegetation growing differently because buried walls affect moisture, a story from local residents about a hole that opened after rain, a stone block that seems out of place, a floor that sounds hollow when tapped. In older excavations, such clues could lead quickly to digging, sometimes too quickly. Archaeology has learned painfully that entering a hidden space is also an act of damage. The moment a sealed chamber is opened, its temperature, humidity, air chemistry, dust, microorganisms, and fragile surfaces begin to change. Discovery is never neutral. This is why the narrow light has become more careful. Excavators now work with surveyors, conservators, geologists, engineers, hydrologists, epigraphers, materials specialists, and remote sensing experts. A buried void is not simply a temptation. It is a problem to be understood before it is touched. Is the ceiling stable? Is the chamber filled with water or gas? Are there paintings on the walls that might flake when the air changes? Is there organic material preserved by a delicate microclimate? Does the passage run beneath an existing monument that could be damaged by excavation? The desire to know must be balanced against the responsibility not to destroy. Ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity, magnetometry, seismic methods, LiDAR, drone mapping, and satellite imagery have transformed the search for hidden ancient spaces. These tools do not replace excavation, but they change its rhythm. They allow archaeologists to detect anomalies, buried walls, voids, ditches, chambers, roads, foundations, and changes in soil or stone. A scan may show a rectangular shape beneath a platform or a line running under a street where no visible passage exists. Yet an anomaly is not an answer. It is a question with a shape. It may be a chamber, a natural cavity, a later disturbance, a drain, a collapse pocket, a root system, or a meaningless contrast in the ground. This uncertainty is crucial. Popular stories often turn remote sensing results into instant revelations, as if every hidden void were proof of a lost palace, secret archive, or forbidden civilization. Archaeologists are more cautious because they have seen how often the underground deceives. Soil density changes, stones shift, water creates cavities, burrowing animals disturb layers, modern utilities cut through ancient sites. Earlier excavators leave trenches that later instruments detect as mysterious shapes. The evidence remains incomplete until tested by careful excavation or direct inspection, and even then interpretation may remain open. When excavation does begin, it rarely resembles the fantasy of bursting through a sealed door into a complete world. It is slower, more disciplined, and far more demanding. Soil is removed in layers, context is recorded, objects are mapped before they are lifted, sediments are sampled, walls are stabilized, every change in color, texture, or compaction can matter. In an underground passage, a few centimeters of fill may contain the difference between natural collapse and deliberate sealing. A fragment of pottery may date the closure, a charcoal sample may reveal fire, a layer of silt may show flooding after abandonment, a footprint in mud, if preserved, may be more valuable than gold. The deeper archaeologists go, the more they must think like both investigators and guests. A tomb, crypt, or sacred chamber was not built for modern curiosity. It belonged to a world of rules that no longer survives fully. This creates an ethical tension. Ancient burials hold evidence about health, diet, migration, kinship, disease, violence, status, and belief. But they also contain human remains. Sacred places can reveal history. But they may still matter to descendant communities or modern religious groups. No single explanation fully accounts for how every site should be treated, and the debate continues across archaeology. Knowledge is important, but so is humility before the dead and before living communities connected to them. The narrow light also reveals how much early archaeology missed. In past centuries, explorers and antiquarians often sought treasure, inscriptions, statues, and spectacular architecture. They sometimes cleared passages rapidly, discarded ordinary debris, overlooked plant remains, failed to record small finds, or damaged fragile surfaces. The discoveries were real, but their methods could erase context. A sealed chamber opened in the 19th century might yield remarkable objects while losing information about floor deposits, organic traces, footprints, residue, or the sequence of blocking. Modern scholars often have to reconstruct not only the ancient site, but also the history of its disturbance by earlier investigators. Even now, technology cannot solve everything. A robot may enter a narrow shaft, but it cannot always interpret what it sees. A camera may reveal painted walls, but not the ceremony performed before them. A scan may show voids under a platform, but not whether they are ritual chambers, construction spaces, natural cavities, or collapsed drains. Chemical analysis can identify residues of wine, oil, resin, blood, incense, or minerals, but the meaning of their use depends on context. DNA and isotopic studies can trace human movement and ancestry, but they cannot restore a vanished chant, a forbidden rule, or the fear felt at a sealed gate. Still, the modern toolkit has widened the story in extraordinary ways. Archaeologists can now map entire buried landscapes without lifting every stone. They can identify ancient river channels, abandoned canals, settlement mounds, road networks, field systems, and hidden foundations from above. In forested regions, LiDAR can strip away vegetation digitally and reveal earthworks long hidden under trees in desert regions. Satellite imagery can trace old routes and settlement patterns invisible at ground level. Beneath cities still inhabited today, non-invasive methods can detect buried structures where excavation would be impossible or unethical. The Forbidden City is no longer searched only by shovel. It is searched by waves, pulses, images, samples, and comparisons. Yet the most important tool remains interpretation. Evidence does not speak by itself. A blocked passage must be placed within geology, architecture, pottery chronology, textual references, environmental history, and human behaviour. A hidden chamber beneath a temple means different things if it predates the temple, belongs to its foundation, was added later, or cuts through an earlier sacred layer. A water channel means different things if it is clean, polluted, plastered, repaired, connected to domestic drainage, or aligned with ritual basins. A void beneath a palace means different things if it contains storage jars, administrative seals, burials, collapsed debris, or nothing at all. The lesser-known surprise is how often nothing matters. An empty chamber may be empty because it was never finished. It may have been cleaned before sealing. It may have held perishable materials that vanished. It may have been looted. It may have served as a symbolic space where the void itself mattered. Modern expectations often demand objects, but ancient meaning was not always object-heavy. A carefully carved empty room beneath a sacred building can be an archaeological frustration, and a powerful clue at the same time. Absence, once again, becomes evidence. The archaeologist's narrow light therefore does not simply expose secrets. It teaches patience with ambiguity. It shows that the buried city is not a single cinematic revelation waiting for the right door to open. It is a complicated field of traces, tool marks, fills, drains, seals, residues, cracks, repairs, voids, fragments, and silences. Some clues confirm practical systems, some support ritual interpretations, some point to crisis or abandonment, some refuse easy classification. The deeper the investigation goes, the clearer it becomes that ancient people were not building for our categories. They were building for their own needs, fears, hierarchies, and gods. And this is where the story becomes most vulnerable to distortion. The same darkness that invites careful study also invites exaggeration. A hidden chamber becomes a lost kingdom. A drainage tunnel becomes an escape route for vanished masters. A natural cave becomes proof of impossible technology. A sealed shaft becomes a forbidden archive of knowledge that would rewrite history. These stories are powerful because they satisfy a hunger the evidence does not always feed. But the real underground city does not need fantasy to be astonishing. Its truth is quieter, harder, and more durable. The narrow light can only move a little at a time. It enters one passage, records one wall, samples one layer, stabilizes one chamber, and leaves much still unseen. But in that limited beam, the ancient world returns with a texture no legend can supply: the curve of a chisel mark, the smear of soot from a worker's lamp, the mineral line where water once stood, the footprint of someone crossing wet clay in darkness, and never imagining that thousands of years later, another human being would pause over that mark and understand that the city below had once been alive. The moment a hidden chamber is found, two stories begin to compete. One story belongs to the evidence: the measured wall, the pottery layer, the blocked shaft, the water stain, the tool mark, the burned beam, the human bone, the inscription fragment, the awkward silence of an empty room. The other story belongs to imagination. It arrives faster. It fills the darkness before the archaeologist has finished drawing the plan. It says that the chamber is a forbidden archive, a lost temple, a royal escape route, a prison for a secret cult, a map to another civilization, or the entrance to a city so vast that all known history must be rewritten. The first story is slow and disciplined. The second is immediate and seductive. This tension has always surrounded underground discoveries. The buried world feels like it should contain revelations proportional to the effort required to reach it. A chamber under a sacred precinct seems too dramatic to be ordinary storage. A tunnel beneath a palace seems too suggestive to be drainage. A sealed door seems too deliberate to hide nothing more than collapse fill or a finished burial. Modern viewers often want every underground space to carry a final answer. But ancient architecture is rarely so generous. It offers possibilities, then forces them to be narrowed by context. The mainstream explanation for many hidden spaces begins with function. Water systems move beneath cities because cities require water. Drains run under streets because waste and storm runoff must go somewhere. Cellars exist because cool storage matters. Quarries leave voids because stone is needed. Tombs are cut into the ground because burial, preservation, and separation matter. Foundation deposits are buried because buildings require ritual beginnings. These explanations may sound plain, but they are powerful because they match repeated patterns across many sites and cultures. They do not flatten the mystery. They give it weight. At the same time, function alone is not enough. A cistern can be practical and sacred. A tomb can be burial and political theatre. A tunnel can be drainage in one century and refuge in another. A cave can begin as a natural shelter, become a shrine, become a burial place, become a storage chamber, and finally become a legend. This is where careful interpretation resists both extremes. It does not reduce everything to plumbing. Nor does it turn every underground wall into proof of hidden priestly conspiracies. Ancient spaces often had layered lives. Their meanings changed because the people above them changed. Popular theories usually become weakest when they demand one grand explanation for every fragment. A few tunnels become evidence of a continent-wide secret network. A sealed chamber becomes proof of suppressed knowledge. A natural cavity becomes an artificial hall. A misunderstood inscription becomes a map. These claims are often unsupported not because archaeologists dislike mystery, but because they skip the hard work that makes mystery meaningful: dating, stratigraphy, material analysis, comparison, and attention to how ancient people actually built. A dramatic story that ignores soil layers is not a better story. It is simply less accountable. There are also fringe claims that imagine lost technologies, vanished master civilizations, or hidden archives capable of overturning all established history. Such claims should be treated with skepticism. They often rely on selective evidence, exaggerated measurements, mistranslations, or the idea that ancient people could not have built impressive things without outside help. That assumption is not only unsupported, it diminishes the real skill of ancient workers. The underground achievements of the ancient world do not require impossible machines. They require labour organisation, geological knowledge, tools, patience, and societies willing to invest enormous effort into darkness. Yet mainstream caution should not be mistaken for lack of wonder. The accepted explanations are astonishing in their own right. It is astonishing that ancient engineers could align tunnels from different directions with limited instruments. It is astonishing that whole communities could live through siege because someone had hidden access to water. It is astonishing that tomb builders could carve symbolic landscapes into mountains. It is astonishing that a sealed foundation deposit, placed where no living audience could applaud it, could remain in darkness longer than the kingdom that buried it. The real ancient world is not dull. It is only less obedient to modern fantasy than fantasy would like. A lesser-known complication is that archaeologists themselves sometimes disagree sharply. One scholar may see a ritual closure where another sees construction fill. One may interpret a chamber as sacred because of its location and unusual deposits, while another may argue that the deposits are secondary debris. A passage may be called defensive, symbolic, hydraulic, or unfinished depending on which evidence is emphasized. Scholars still debate many such cases because the physical record often allows several plausible readings. This uncertainty is not failure. It is what responsible interpretation looks like when the evidence is fragmentary. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world therefore cannot be understood through a single argument. It must be approached as a spectrum. At one end are clearly practical structures: drains, cisterns, wells, storage pits, quarries, and mines. At the other are clearly sacred or funerary spaces: tombs, crypts, ritual caves, foundation deposits, and underworld shrines. Between them lies the most interesting territory, where use and meaning overlap. A water source becomes holy. A storage chamber becomes restricted. A quarry becomes a chapel. A tomb becomes a political anchor. A sealed passage becomes both engineering problem and mythic boundary. The competing explanations in the dust reveal something larger about ancient civilization itself. These societies did not divide the world into neat modern categories. A king's tomb was not only a burial, it was theology, dynastic claim, labour project, artistic program, security challenge, and landscape statement. A temple was not only a religious building, it could be economic institution, archive, storehouse, workshop, court of authority, and sacred machine. An underground room beneath such a complex cannot be interpreted by one label alone. It belongs to a world in which survival, power, and belief were braided together. This is why the most reliable picture is also the most layered. Beneath ancient cities there were hidden systems, but not necessarily one universal secret system. There were forbidden spaces, but their forbidden nature came from many causes: sacred restriction, royal security, burial customs, danger, storage control, engineering needs, and later forgetting. There were lost passages, but some were lost by design, some by disaster, some by neglect, and some by the ordinary accumulation of time. There were mysteries, but mystery does not automatically mean the evidence points beyond history. Often it points deeper into history, into the difficult texture of human decisions. When the dust settles, the unsupported legends fade, but the real question remains sharper than before. What can the fragments actually reveal? Not what the modern imagination wishes was hidden, but what the stone, fill, watermarks, artifacts, bones, inscriptions, and absences allow us to say. The Forbidden City must now be rebuilt not as fantasy, but as a cautious composite of surviving traces, each one small, each one incomplete, and each one capable of changing the shape of the story when placed beside the others. What the fragments reveal is not a perfect buried metropolis waiting under one ancient capital, but something more intricate and more human, a second architecture of survival, memory, restriction, and fear beneath the visible city. The evidence comes in pieces that rarely announce their meaning alone: a lamp niche cut into a wall, a drain beneath a street, a plastered cistern under a courtyard, a shaft descending below a shrine, a tomb chamber placed where later buildings pressed down above it, a sealed foundation deposit hidden under a wall, a stairway worn by feet and then blocked by stone. Each fragment is modest, but together they show that the ancient city had depth in every sense of the word. The artifacts found in underground spaces often speak quietly. Pottery is one of the most important voices, not because it seems glamorous, but because it carries time. A broken jar and a fill layer can help date when a passage was blocked. A storage vessel left in place may show what a chamber held. A fine bowl in a tomb may point toward offering practice. A lamp dropped in a corridor may suggest use, intrusion, or maintenance. Pottery moves through daily life so constantly that, when found carefully, it becomes a kind of clock made of clay. It tells archaeologists not only that people were present, but when and sometimes how they move through hidden spaces. Tools tell another part of the story. Chisel marks, hammer scars, wedge holes, quarry cuts, and unfinished surfaces reveal construction as process rather than miracle. A chamber polished smooth may have been meant for ritual, display, or elite burial, while a rough-cut passage may have been functional, temporary, or unfinished. A tunnel that changes direction awkwardly may show builders correcting course. A wall surface blackened by lamp soot may mark repeated use in darkness. In some underground places, the marks of labour are more moving than the final design. They restore the hands that cut the forbidden world out of stone, one blow after another. Bones change the emotional weight of the evidence. Human remains in underground spaces may belong to formal burials, secondary deposits, victims of collapse, people hiding during crisis, later intrusions, or disturbed graves. Their meaning depends entirely on context. A carefully arranged body with grave goods differs from scattered bones in rubble. Infant burials under floors differ from royal tombs. Animal bones may reflect meals, offerings, waste, sacrifice, intrusion by later creatures, or the natural use of abandoned chambers by animals. Scholars still debate many deposits because bone alone does not tell the whole story. Its position, condition, associated objects, and surrounding layer must be read together. Inscriptions, when they appear, can feel like sudden voices in the dark, but even they rarely solve everything. A name, dedication, ownership mark, ritual phrase, administrative label, or funerary text can anchor a space to a person, office, deity, or institution. Yet inscriptions are often missing, damaged, reused, or moved from their original context. A block with royal writing may have been placed deliberately, or it may have been recycled by later builders with no respect for its first meaning. A short text can clarify one detail while leaving the larger chamber mysterious. What survives in the record suggests intention, but not always the full action that once surrounded it. Environmental traces reveal the underground city as a living system. Pollen, seeds, phytoliths, charcoal, insect remains, mineral deposits, plaster chemistry, soil micromorphology, and residue on vessels can show what was stored, burned, eaten, offered, grown, or washed through a space. A cistern sediment may preserve evidence of changing water quality. A drain's contents may reveal diet, craft activity, waste disposal, or flood events. Charcoal can point toward fire, fuel choice, or ritual burning. These traces are often tiny, easily overlooked, and less dramatic than statues, but they bring the hidden city closer to ordinary life. They show not only what people believed, but what they handled, consumed, cleaned, and feared. Architecture provides the strongest skeleton. A chamber's placement matters. Beneath a temple, an underground room may relate to ritual, storage, foundations, earlier sacred layers, or water management. Beneath a palace, it may connect to administration, treasury, service routes, or defence. Beneath houses, it may suggest storage, burial, craft work, or household continuity. Outside city walls, caves and rock-cut chambers may relate to burial grounds, refuge, quarrying, or marginal cult places. No single explanation fully accounts for every example, but repeated patterns help narrow possibilities. Location is never neutral in an ancient city. The place of a hidden room is part of its meaning. The strangest fragments are sometimes the absences. A sealed chamber with no objects may seem disappointing, but emptiness can be historical. It may mean the room was cleaned before closure. It may mean the contents were perishable. It may mean looters emptied it long ago. It may mean the chamber was symbolic, unfinished, or created to stabilise a structure above. An empty passage can also be a sign of fear if it was abandoned quickly, or of discipline if it was deliberately cleared before sealing. Absence is frustrating because it refuses spectacle, but it often prevents false certainty. It forces the story to remain careful. From all these traces, a cautious picture forms. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world is not one hidden civilization separate from the known world. It is the underside of known civilization itself. It is the water held below courtyards, the dead beneath floors, the rituals behind thresholds, the archives behind guarded doors, the drains under streets, the quarries turned into rooms, the wells that decide whether a settlement endures. And the sealed chambers that preserve choices no text explains. It belongs not to fantasy, but to the real ancient habit of layering life over memory and power over darkness. This picture is more powerful because it does not require every mystery to be solved. The fragments reveal a world where people built downward when they needed protection, secrecy, continuity, coolness, sanctity, or escape. They reveal that ancient cities were never as flat as maps make them appear. They had roots, organs, scars, and buried nerves. They reveal that the surface monuments we admire were often supported by hidden systems that mattered just as much as visible grandeur. A temple's beauty could depend on a drain. A king's legitimacy could depend on a tomb. A city's survival could depend on a cistern no traveller ever praised. And yet the fragments also reveal fragility. Underground systems require knowledge to remain alive. A blocked drain becomes a problem. A forgotten well becomes a danger. A sealed archive becomes unreadable. A tomb loses its guardians. A ritual chamber loses its ritual. A passage loses its map. Once the people who understand a hidden place disappear, the place changes category. It stops being infrastructure, shrine, treasury, or route, and becomes mystery. That transformation may be the most important clue of all. The Forbidden City is not only something ancient people built, it is something time produced by stripping away context. Stone survived, but permission vanished. Passages survived, but maps vanished. Chambers survived, but ceremonies vanished. The fragments reveal an ancient world that is both astonishingly capable and painfully vulnerable. A world that trusted the earth to protect what mattered and discovered, in the end, that the earth also knows how to keep secrets from everyone. The city becomes a warning when its hidden spaces stop looking like puzzles and begin to look like consequences. At first, the underground invites curiosity. It asks what lies behind the blocked door, where the tunnel leads, why the chamber was sealed, whose hands cut the passage, what ceremony once filled the dark. But after enough fragments are gathered, a colder realization appears. The buried city is not only evidence of ancient skill, it is evidence of how easily a civilization can lose contact with the systems that keep it alive. The most dangerous failures are not always the ones carved on victory monuments or described in royal laments. Sometimes they begin below the floor, in the spaces nobody celebrates until they stop working. A surface city can maintain the appearance of strength long after its foundations are weakening. The walls still stand, the temple still receives offerings, the palace still issues commands, merchants still pass through gates, and children still chase one another through alleys where older walls sleep under newer ones. Yet beneath that rhythm, drains may clog, cisterns may crack, wells may drop, storage rooms may empty, archives may become disordered, restricted knowledge may shrink to a few aging specialists, and old passages may be closed because no one remembers how to maintain them safely. Collapse often looks sudden only from a distance. Up close, it may be made of small abandonments. This is one of the lessons hidden architecture teaches better than monumental ruins. A fallen statue announces the end of a ruler's image. A burned gate announces violence. A smashed relief announces conquest or religious change. But a blocked drain, an abandoned cistern, a sealed storage chamber, or a forgotten passage shows the loss of continuity. It shows that the ordinary chain of care has broken. Someone no longer cleans the channel before the rains. Someone no longer checks the plaster before the dry season. Someone no longer knows which shaft is dangerous, which room floods, which hidden entrance leads to water, which wall must not be weakened. Civilizations do not live by grandeur alone. They live by maintenance. The underground city is therefore a monument to labour that rarely receives glory. It records the work of people who are almost never named diggers, haulers, plasterers, cleaners, lamp carriers, water drawers, guards, scribes, storeroom attendants, tomb workers, drain repairers, quarry hands, and those who knew the old routes by memory. Their knowledge is practical, inherited, local, and vulnerable. Kings may claim to build forever. But forever depends on the people who remove silt from channels and patch cracks before the next storm. When the institutions that organise such work weaken, the hidden city begins to fail before the visible one admits danger. There is a human consequence to that failure. When water systems decline, ordinary families feel it before royal inscriptions do. A woman must walk farther for water. A pot tastes of sediment. A courtyard floods after rain. Stored grain spoils in a damp chamber. A neighbourhood well no longer reaches the water table in late summer. A child is warned not to play near an old shaft. A family moves away from a district that has become unhealthy, unstable, or unlucky. These small changes rarely make dramatic history, but they are history. They are the lived experience of a city losing confidence in its own ground. Secrecy can make this worse. Restricted systems are powerful while the people who control them remain competent and trusted. But when knowledge is too narrowly held, crisis can turn secrecy into fragility. If only a few officials know the location of a hidden store, what happens when they die during invasion? If only a priestly lineage understands the closure rituals of a chamber, what happens when the temple loses its income? If only certain builders know the safe route through underground passages, what happens when labour traditions break hidden knowledge protects? But it also concentrates risk. The forbidden door can guard a resource, but it can also become useless when the key disappears. This pattern echoes far beyond any one ancient place. Civilizations create systems too complex for every citizen to understand. They depend on specialists, records, routines, and trust. That is not a flaw. It is how large societies function. But complexity creates blind spots. The more impressive the city above becomes, the easier it is to forget the invisible obligations beneath it. Water, waste, food storage, foundations, burial customs, archives, sacred legitimacy, emergency routes. And local memory must all be managed. When they are neglected, the city may still look powerful for a while. It may even build more monuments as its hidden systems weaken. Ancient ruins sometimes preserve this contradiction with uncomfortable clarity. The Forbidden City also warns against the illusion that hiding something preserves it perfectly. Ancient people sealed chambers to protect the dead, safeguard offerings, close rituals, hide wealth, or remove danger. Sometimes sealing worked. It preserved paintings, objects, architecture, and deposits that would otherwise have vanished. But sealing also separates a place from living memory. Once closed, a chamber depends on the future remembering why it was closed and where it lies. If that memory fails, protection becomes disappearance. The sealed room survives, but no longer belongs to anyone. Its meaning drains away more slowly than water through cracked plaster, but just as surely. There is a strange sadness in this. The people who filled a chamber, blocked a stair, or buried a sacred structure may not have meant to erase it. They may have believed they were honouring it, completing it, protecting it, or making it foundational for what came next. And in one sense, they succeeded. The earth preserved what daylight might have destroyed, but time is an unreliable guardian. It protects matter while stripping away intention. Modern archaeology can recover walls, deposits, dates, and sometimes names, but it cannot always recover the emotional certainty that made the closure meaningful. What survives is enough to suggest, not enough to fully restore. The warning sharpens when the buried city is rediscovered. Modern observers often arrive with confidence. They have instruments, maps, cameras, conservation labs, databases, and theories. They can see what ancient people could not see in the same way: long environmental patterns, regional settlement shifts, chemical residues, aerial traces, genetic evidence, and geological sequences. Yet they also face the same limits that ancient people faced. They cannot enter every space safely. They cannot stop water forever. They cannot prevent all decay. They cannot recover every lost context. They can only widen the beam of light and admit where it ends. This humility matters because the ancient world is often used as a mirror. People look at ruins and see either triumph or failure, genius or superstition, mystery or warning. The buried city resists such simple reflection. It shows humans as technically capable, spiritually imaginative, politically ambitious, and dangerously dependent on systems they may not fully control. It shows that secrecy can create awe and vulnerability at the same time. It shows that memory needs maintenance just as much as masonry does. It shows that a civilization can be rich in monuments and poor in resilience if the hidden work beneath daily life is allowed to fail. No single explanation fully accounts for why ancient cities vanish from ordinary memory. Some are destroyed, some are abandoned, some shrink gradually, some are buried by environmental change. Some are transformed so thoroughly by later occupation that their earlier identities become almost invisible. But the underground spaces make one truth especially clear: disappearance is not always the opposite of survival. A city may disappear from history precisely because parts of it survive underground, removed from sight, detached from language, waiting for a future that can recognise the stone but not always the story. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world becomes a warning because it asks what modern societies are building out of sight, not in a sensational way, not as a simple comparison, but as a quiet pressure on the imagination. Every civilization has hidden systems. Every city depends on networks most people rarely see. Every society stores memory in institutions, records, specialists, and infrastructures that seem permanent until they are neglected. The ancient underground reminds us that what is invisible is not secondary. Often it is what holds the visible world together. And so the buried chambers lose some of their exotic distance. They are still ancient, still strange, still shaped by beliefs and fears not identical to ours. But they are also familiar. They are places where people tried to preserve what mattered, control what frightened them, store what they needed, hide what they valued, honour what they had lost, and build foundations strong enough to outlast uncertainty. They failed in some ways and succeeded in others. Their cities fell. But their darkness endured. Their rules vanished, but their thresholds remain. By the time the story reaches the present, the Forbidden City is no longer only an archaeological mystery. It is a layered memory beneath our feet, a reminder that civilizations are not erased only when enemies arrive at the gates. They can also fade when maintenance stops, when knowledge narrows, when records vanish, when water wins, when rituals lose their keepers, and when the living no longer understand the spaces they have inherited. The final mystery is not simply what lies below the ancient world. It is why so much of what keeps any world alive is hidden until it is almost too late to notice. The present walks over the ancient world without always knowing it. Streets run above older streets. Houses settle over walls whose builders spoke languages no one nearby can read. Fields cover cemeteries. Shrines stand on platforms raised over earlier shrines, which may themselves rest on places that were sacred before writing reached them. Beneath the ordinary surface, time remains layered, compacted, and unfinished. The Forbidden City survives in that layering, not as a single complete place waiting to be named, but as a pattern of buried memory beneath human settlement. It is under ruined capitals and living towns, under temples visited by tourists, under hills that look natural until a cut in the earth reveals brick, bone, plaster, and ash. Modern archaeology has made the ancient underground more visible than it has ever been, yet visibility has not dissolved the mystery. In some ways, it has refined it. The old legends spoke of secret kingdoms, sealed treasures, and forbidden doors guarded by fear. Modern research replaces those images with something more exact and more unsettling: drainage channels that kept cities alive, crypts that shaped sacred authority, tombs that anchored dynasties, foundation deposits placed in darkness for unseen audiences, water systems that marked the difference between endurance and collapse, and sealed passages that preserve decisions no surviving voice explains. The mystery no longer depends on fantasy. It depends on the fact that real human lives were deeper and more complex than the surface remains alone can show. The phrase beneath our feet is easy to use casually, But in ancient cities it is almost literal history. A person standing in a market might be above a filled well. A priest crossing a courtyard might pass over a buried offering older than the current temple. A ruler entering a palace might walk above records, stores, or earlier walls absorbed into the architecture of power. A family cooking in a house might live over ancestors placed beneath the floor generations before. The ground was not empty support, it was active memory. It held what the living needed: close but not always visible water, grain, bodies, tools, secrets, and traces of earlier worlds. This is why the Forbidden City remains difficult to separate from the known city. It is not outside civilization, it is civilization's underside. The grand monuments above ground depended on the less celebrated systems below. The sacred court depended on hidden drains. The royal claim depended on tombs, archives, and foundation rituals. The neighbourhood depended on wells and storage pits. The dead remained near the living, not only in story but in physical space. The surface world was bright with ceremony, trade, labour, and rule, but below it lay the quieter arrangements that made continuity possible. Scholars still debate how to interpret many underground spaces because the evidence remains incomplete, and because ancient life does not fit neatly into modern divisions. A room may be practical and sacred at once. A passage may be used for maintenance in one century and for ritual in another. A sealed chamber may represent fear, reverence, abandonment, engineering repair, or completion. A story remembered by local tradition may preserve a real trace while exaggerating its scale beyond recognition. No single explanation fully accounts for the buried world because the buried world was never single in purpose. It was layered by use, reuse, forgetting, and rediscovery. There is also a deeper uncertainty. Archaeology can identify stone, plaster, sediment, tool marks, ceramics, bones, residues, and inscriptions. It can reconstruct dates, functions, environmental conditions, and phases of construction. It can show where a corridor ran and when it was blocked, but it cannot always recover the emotional charge of the moment when someone descended. It cannot fully restore the fear of entering a tomb after the seal was broken. The relief of finding water in a hidden cistern during drought. The authority felt by a priest carrying a sacred object out from a restricted chamber, or the grief of a family placing a body beneath the floor of a house they would continue to inhabit. The material survives more easily than the feeling. Yet something of that feeling remains. It appears in the care of a sealed doorway. It appears in the hidden placement of offerings under foundations. It appears in steps worn by repeated descent. It appears in the soot of lamps held close to stone. It appears in the decision to bury, close, to protect, avoid, or remember. The Forbidden City is not only a subject for excavation, it is a record of human attention. People do not carve underground chambers, line wells, plaster cisterns, seal tombs, and guard thresholds unless the space below matters deeply. The modern world often treats ruins as endings. A collapsed wall means a city failed. A buried chamber means a culture vanished. A sealed gate means a secret was lost. But the underground teaches a slower view. Burial can be loss, but it can also be preservation. Silence can mean abandonment, but it can also mean survival beyond language. A city can vanish from maps while remaining present in the earth, waiting not as a complete answer, but as a field of clues. The dead city is not dead in the way a burned object is dead. It continues to act on the present by troubling certainty. That may be the lasting legacy of the Forbidden City beneath the ancient world. It forces humility. It reminds us that the ancient past is not a finished story neatly stored behind glass. It is uneven, damaged, and alive with unanswered questions. It resists both dismissal and exaggeration. It asks to be taken seriously without being turned into fantasy. It shows that ancient people were capable of engineering, imagination, organisation, devotion, secrecy, and fear on scales that still challenge modern assumptions. It also shows that their worlds, like ours, depended on hidden systems that required care. When a sealed chamber is opened today, it is not only the ancient past that is exposed. The present is exposed too, its hunger for revelation, its impatience with uncertainty, its desire for lost knowledge, its temptation to turn every dark space into a legend. The better response is quieter. It is to look closely, to measure before declaring, to understand that a drain may matter as much as a treasure, that a storage jar may speak as powerfully as a royal inscription, that a blocked passage may preserve not a conspiracy but a human decision made under pressure long ago. The Forbidden City survives because the earth is both destroyer and guardian. It crushes roofs, swallows streets, fills rooms with silt, and erases names, but it also shelters walls from weather, keeps footprints in hardened mud, preserves lamps where they fell, holds watermarks on plaster, and protects small objects from the violence of daylight. The ancient world beneath us is not silent because it has nothing to say. It is silent because its language is slow. It speaks through layers. Not speeches, it speaks through fragments, not complete confession. And so the final image is not of a golden chamber suddenly opened, or a lost empire revealed whole in the beam of a lamp. It is simpler and more lasting a stairway descending beneath a ruined court, its lower steps filled with dust, its walls carrying the faint black breath of ancient lamps. Above it, the wind moves across broken stone. Below it, the air is cool and still. Somewhere in that darkness, water once gathered, hands once worked, rules once mattered, and memory was placed where sunlight could not reach, The ancient world does not disappear cleanly. It sinks, layer by layer, into the places it once tried to control. A city rises in confidence, cuts its drains, seals its tombs, stores its water, guards its sacred rooms, and teaches its people where they may and may not go. Then time begins its patient work. The temple roof falls, the king's name loses its voice, the well silts, the passage cools into stillness, the forbidden door remains, but the fear around it changes shape. What was once law becomes rumour, what was once sacred becomes dangerous, what was once maintained becomes mystery. There is a strange gentleness in the final survival of such places. The earth does not remember as humans remember. It does not preserve the whole song, the full prayer, the exact face, the spoken rule, the private grief, or the reason a last stone was set into place. It keeps weight, pressure, outline, residue. It keeps the curve of a wall, the ash of a lamp, the mineral stain of vanished water, the hollow where a door once turned. It lets the rest fade. And yet those fragments are enough to remind us that vanished civilizations were not abstractions. They were made of breath, labour, thirst, belief, fear, and hands moving through darkness. The forbidden city beneath the ancient world is therefore not only a hidden place, it is a way of seeing time. Every civilization builds upward because it wants to be seen, but it also builds downward because it needs to endure. It hides what is precious, buries what is powerful, stores what is necessary, and places its dead where memory can become foundation. Then, sooner or later, the visible world weakens and the hidden world becomes the last witness. Perhaps that is why buried chambers hold the imagination so strongly. They suggest that history is never entirely finished. Beneath the cleared ruins, beneath the tourist paths, beneath the fields and modern streets, there may still be a sealed pocket of ancient intention waiting in the dark. Not necessarily a treasure, not necessarily a revelation that overturns all knowledge, but something quieter and more human, a room closed with care, a jar left behind, a stair worn by feet, a trace of water, a decision no one has touched for centuries. And above it all, life continues. Wind crosses the stones, grass grows over walls, cities build over cities, people walk, unaware, over the old thresholds. Beneath them, the ancient dark remains patient, holding its fragments close, not refusing to speak but waiting for someone willing to listen slowly.